Great. Let's. Oh, okay. Hello. Just. I hope you can understand. There we go. That looks better. Um, just give me 1 second, and I'll set up here. All right. Yeah, that looks better. So if anyone's out there, could you just let me know if the sound is coming out okay? If there are any issues, please let me know. But hopefully the sound is okay. And we'll just hang on for a bit. And excuse me, today's film is 1995's Heat, Michael Mann's Heat. And so we'll be talking about this during the live stream today. We're scheduled to begin in about 5 minutes or so. So just hang on and we can get going. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So Mike Eli is here. Hello. Begbie80 is here. Hello. Rui Ferreira is here. Hello. Thank you very much. And the sound seems to be okay where you, my dear friends, are right now. So that's good. So thank you very much. So once again, we'll just hold on tight and we'll wait a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. So I'm looking forward to it very much. So excuse me. And I hope everyone is doing well during these times, you know. These are still quite hectic and difficult and strange and stressful times for a lot of reasons. And so I hope everyone is remaining calm and healthy and well, or as well as can be expected. So. Okay, just give another second. Oh, Cinephiliac11 is here. Hello. And Begbie80, no problem, my friend. It's nice to see you. Thank you for stopping by. Casual Glutton is here. Hello. Alfred Winterbottom is here. Hello. It's nice to see you. Thank you very much. So once again, we'll just give it another. Andre is here. Hello. It's nice to see you. We'll give it another 4 minutes or so, and then we'll get started. Once again, the film under discussion today will be Michael Mann's Heat. And I will be talking a little bit about sort of preliminary topics here, things that I will go over, things that I won't go over, and things of that nature. I'll mention it later, but I won't be talking in any detail or anything at all. I don't have any comments planned, for instance, about any deleted scenes. I don't have any comments necessarily on LA Takedown or anything else of that nature. I'm going to be focusing in just primarily on the film Heat, the release version anyway. There are some issues, or not issues, but there are some points, I suppose, that can be made between the various versions of the film Heat, and in particular the newer director's, what do they call it? Director's Definitive Edition, which is right here, and there are some issues with it. It's a little bit different than earlier release versions of the film Heat, and so I'll try to mention those if I can. But my comments today will not be anything in terms of dependent on one version or another. So if you've only seen, let's say, the quote-unquote director's definitive version, that's okay. If you haven't seen this version, but you've seen an earlier version, that's okay. I mean, I say versions, they are more or less, they're very, very similar. And so, but I'll try to address that to the best of my ability later today. They are quite interesting, but I'll save my comments for that later in the live stream. But we will be just checking it out. So just give me 1 second here. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. All right. Okie dokie. All right. Well, I suppose we can get going very soon here. Let's see. Okay, great. What is it now? 10:58. So just give it another minute and a half or so, and then we'll get going. So, okay, I have just trying to go over in my head one last time those things that I want to talk about. So I'm pretty much okay, I think. There are always little details that I tend to forget over time, but I'll try to make sure everything is mentioned over the course of this live stream. So, just give it another minute or so, and then we'll begin. Okay. Right. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Well, I think we can begin. Here we go. Yes, I think we can begin in earnest now. So let us begin. Okay. Greetings from Tokyo, my dear, dear friends. This is Daisuke, and we are live. This is another Film Club live stream. And here we are talking about the film from 1995, that film being Heat, directed by Michael Mann, and starring, among other very great and interesting actors, Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. And it's a very kind of epic powerhouse of a criminal saga, crime saga, heist film, cops and robbers, police procedural, relationship drama, sort of a humanistic drama, really thrilling, almost brutal, suspenseful shootout crime epic of epic proportions. And I think this is a film that is very popular for many, many legitimate and reasonable reasons, which I'll try to mention a little bit over the course of this next, oh gosh, hour or so. I don't know how long it will last. We'll try to go as long as possible here. And so we will be talking about this film, Heat. Now, the way this works is the live chat is open. So anyone who wants to join in the conversation in the live chat, you are welcome to check it out. You're welcome to leave comments behind and meet other people here. And you can share your thoughts about this film in the live chat. And I will be doing my very best to keep up with the chat and to try to maintain a conversation with you and talking about this film. So I look forward to that conversation very much. Now, just a few preliminary points about how I'm going to be conducting the live stream. It's the usual stuff, but let me just mention it anyway. I will be talking about this. I will be talking about this film as a fan because I have no direct knowledge. I haven't participated in the background of this. I haven't studied this film, and so I don't have any real insider knowledge, let me put it that way, about this particular film. I only know this film as a fan, and so that is how I'm going to be approaching it. Now, I suppose that I can say that hold on, let me just bring this down a little bit. There we go. I suppose I can say that I've seen this film many, many, many times. I've seen this film in the theater when it was first released, and I subsequently saw it on a two-tape VHS tape, and then I saw it again on DVD, and then I subsequently saw it again on this Blu-ray. But I've seen it ever since its release. And I was very fortunate to see it in the theater, and it was a really quite exhilarating experience. And so, but I only know this film, as I say, as a casual fan. but I will be trying to indicate some comments that I have with respect to this film from my own viewpoint as a casual fan. And so I hope that you can understand that. So I don't know absolutely every single detail with respect to the production history or the script writing process or the filmmaking process or anything like that. I only just know this as someone who has seen this film a number of times. And so I'll try to address as many of the comments and questions as possible. But of course, there will be things that I won't know the answer to. And so I will, again, do my very best. But again, if I can't answer any of your questions, please, I ask for your understanding ahead of time. But I will try my best, of course. Then, of course, I should say that the live chat is open for anyone who wants to talk about this film or talk with each other. You are very free to do so. Once again, I would just say that just as always, I know and I can trust in everyone here, and I can really rely upon you, all of you, my dear friends here, to make sure that when you're expressing yourselves or listening to others, always be sure to maintain a sense of respect and decorum with people's opinions here. And we can disagree. There's no need, of course, to fight or anything like that in the live chat. Disagreements are, of course, encouraged. Agreements also are encouraged. But there is always a good way to show even disagreement. And so I know I can trust you and I can rely upon you because you've always supported me in the past, and I know that that will continue going forward. So thank you very much in advance for that. Let me put it that way. And speaking of the live chat, you can ask me any questions you like, except that please note that I will be wanting to focus my energies on the film Heat, which means that if anyone has any questions that are with respect to anything other than this film Heat, please understand, but I will probably just with all due respect, I'll just skip over it very gently and just follow through with the conversation today about Heat. And so if you have any non-Heat related questions for me about any other film or the like, please feel free to leave them in a comment under this video after the fact or under any other video, and I'll do my best to get back to you. I always do my best to get back to comments. Please understand, of course, that I need to, it sometimes takes a little bit of time. I'm very much appreciative of people wanting to get an answer from me about something, a response from me immediately. I'll do my best to respond immediately, but I understand also that sometimes it does take a little bit of time on my end to try to get to everything. So, but I will do my best with that, and I just ask for your patience and understanding going forward, as I know I can trust you and rely upon you for your kindness and understanding as always. And last thing, of course, is this discussion will be filled with spoilers. There will be a detailed discussion of the plot and what happens throughout the film, what happens at the end of the film, what happens in the middle of the film, kind of the middle of the film, I suppose, or 2/3 of the way through the film. It's a long movie, but this is all to say, therefore, that for anyone who has not seen this film, I strongly urge you actually to turn off this live stream, because I don't want to, heaven forbid, I don't want to spoil this film for you. It's best to leave all the surprises of this film unspoiled. And so if you have not seen this film yet, please, I would strongly recommend that you turn off this live stream and try to find the film and watch the film. And after you've seen the film, you can come back. This stream will still be going, or if it's a little bit later, this live stream should be automatically uploaded to this channel as its own video, and so you can always listen if you want to, of course. But that's just a little heads up, so I don't want to again, spoil any of the film for you, because I think it has a lot of surprises for everyone who watches it for the first time. I certainly remember the first time I saw it, as I say, in the theater back in whatever it was, 1995. So, okay, so with that, with those preliminary points established, let me now begin in earnest with respect to this film, Heat. So I can always begin, I suppose, with my initial experiences with this film, and then I'll go to the live chat, and then we'll try to talk about this. Film in earnest. This film, as I say, was one that I saw in the theater in 1995 when it was first released. I seem to recall that the theater was not packed full, but it was a fairly packed, a fairly populated theater, and it was a very kind of it was a very kind of an overwhelming sensory experience, not only because of the sounds and the gunshots and the way that the shootout echoed through that theater. It was really quite unbelievable, and it was so loud. I could feel the ground almost tremble. It was like that. It was really quite striking. And what was also quite striking was this sort of color palette, the way that night was being shot, the way that the bright sunshine of the day was being shot, and it was glaring, glowing right before our very eyes. It's what does Neil Macaulay, the Robert De Niro character, say? Like in Fiji, he talks about the iridescent algae or something like that glowing in the sea, and it was like that. It was really crystal and it was sparkling. The screen was at the theater, and but it wasn't just the look and the feel of the film and the sound of the film, although that was very important. That is very important to this film, as those of you who've seen the film obviously can attest to. But it was also to see Al Pacino and Robert De Niro on screen, and this was a big deal at the time. I remember when it was released, and this was the kind of the what's the phrase, the talk of the town, so to speak. In other words, it was like a big event film. And it was treated like that, and all the trailers were treating it like this. You know, I remember the trailer. One of the trailers was like, two of the finest actors of this generation collide. It was Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, and they also sometimes they added in their Val Kilmer, which was a really interesting way. I think because Val Kilmer at the time was a very hot actor, a very, very popular actor, and so I think that was part of the marketing as well. But I think the main attraction, as it were, was Al Pacino and Robert De Niro together, and that was part of the marketing. And so, but the marketing was not a letdown. In other words, the film did not let us down in that department. On the contrary, when those two actors are together in their own separate narrative worlds in the film, they are respectively quite electrifying in their own respective ways, of course, and I'll try to get into that in a second. There are also some really interesting interplays between this side of the film and that side of the film, and how they mirror each other, how they have the same patterns of storyline and also body language and things like that, and they're sort of similar in that way, but they're also opposites. The way that they dress, there's a kind of opposite. I'll try to get into this later, but Vincent Hanna always has the dark suit and the dark shirt, and he wears a tie, but it's always kind of unnoticeable. It's always black or dark tones, whereas Neil Macaulay, Robert De Niro, has this sort of the gray suit with a lighter shirt and usually no tie. And so there's a kind of a balanced, sort of a nice opposites attract kind of situation going there. Also, Neil Macaulay is very clean cut with the facial hair, and then Vincent Hanna has the sort of the longer hair, a little bit tanned, and also without facial hair, and that sort of thing. But at the same time, and also there's a sense of Vincent being, of course, the police officer, the cop. The lieutenant here, and Neil Macaulay being his prey, right? As Justine, right? The wife says, you always hunt for your prey. What does she say? She says a really interesting line, which I'll talk about with respect to the director's definitive edition. She says, "You sift through the detritus," which I always found an interesting line, but that's not in the director's definitive edition, by the way, that line, but I'll talk about that later. But what was I saying? So Vincent is the hunter in a way, and Neil is the prey, but also Neil is also the hunter in the sense that he is hunting after these scores that are very, very large in terms of monetary gain or whatever. And so he is also, in the sense, a hunter, but he's also the hunted. And it's interesting how those roles seem to get reversed sometimes. Sometimes Vincent is the hunter, but then he is being attacked, and so he becomes the hunted, but then he switches roles again and becomes the hunter. And the same kind of role reversal happens on Neil's side as well. Neil Macaulay, the Robert De Niro character's side as well. But this is just a little bit of foreshadowing for my comments to suggest that I think there is a sense of opposites, but there's also a sense of similarities. There's a sense of patterns between the two worlds, but there's also the sense of mirror imaging. In other words, the patterns are reflections of each other rather than exact copies of each other. But then at the same time, sometimes they are copies of each other. So I find this interplay between the two poles very exciting, and then to see the two actors just electrify the screen in this sort of high voltage way, and each giving voltage in their own respective ways is really quite, in a cinematic sense, very earth-shattering. This was very, very earth-shattering, and it was a big, as I say, it was a big deal at the time, '95, to say that these were this was the first time that they would be together on screen. I know that there's a little bit, it wasn't the first time that they were in the same film together, but the marketing at the time was that they were sharing the same temporal space and geographic space. Which in a certain point of view is true. So I thought that, and then watching the film as a teenager was just electrifying, absolutely electrifying. And I'll try to get into more details about that as I go along. And then as I grew up, as I say, I had the VHS tape, the 2-tape VHS tape, and I just watched that over and over again. It was just a wonderful experience, and it was divided. I remember this distinctly. The 2 tapes were divided in. They divided the film, and the first tape ended with the famous diner scene between De Niro and Pacino. And there was the bit where that the diner scene ends, and they said, well, maybe, or, who knows? And then Neil Macaulay says, well, maybe we'll never see each other again. And then just stops, and then it cuts to Al Pacino, and just slowly you see a smile slowly appear on his face. And then it cuts to De Niro, and you see a smile slowly appear on De Niro's face. And then as these cuts happen, the sound from the background from the diner slowly fades upwards, and we understand that those smiles mean that they know and we know as we're watching this film that that's not the case, because they are going to meet again. And that's an exciting moment. And then it cuts to black, and that was the end of the first tape. And then the second tape started with Vincent Hanna walking back into the MCU unit, and then his crew telling him that they dumped us. What do you mean they dumped us? Right? They dumped us. They dumped all our surveillance. Right? I love the way that. Oh gosh. Well, okay. I'll talk about that later. But in any event, that was my experience with it growing up, and I just again watched it over and over and over again. And then came time for the initial DVD market to emerge, and so I got the DVD with this what do you call it? This kind of snap case. And so, and it even has the proof of purchase thing still in there. And this had the trailers and then chapters and things like that, but nothing of what we know now as special features. But it was still a very big deal because it was a long film, but still was a. But this was you can see it all in one sitting. You didn't have to change tapes, or you didn't have to flip it like a laser disc or anything. So this was a pretty interesting development for me. And the early DVD days. And then much later, this new sort of restored or retouched version of the film emerged, known as the Director's Definitive Edition. And I got to know it again there. I noted that some of the visual palette seemed a little bit lighter in tone, or a little bit light bluer in tone. I noticed that, especially the night scenes. You could make out more in the earlier versions that I remember seeing. There was a little bit more of a thicker darkness, which I thought was very effective, especially for the night scenes. But it really helped in terms of the light and the shining down and. Excuse me here. Sorry about this. So yes, so I just got to know the film again through this new definitive edition. As I said, there were some differences that I noted almost immediately when I saw it, not just in terms of the palette and the look, but also in terms of some little bits that were cut out, in fact. I mentioned earlier about there's a scene with Justine and Vincent, so they are married in the film. And this is after they're having a little party, the cops are having a little party or a get-together or something. And then Vincent is called away because he's been called to the scene of a pretty terrible crime. A young woman, we understand, who was a young prostitute, was found dead, and we understand that this was something that Waingro, the villain of the piece, or one of the villains of the piece, has done in a very terrible thing. And we also understand that this is not the first time, perhaps, that Waingro has done this, and perhaps there is an assumption that maybe he has done this before, and thus this makes him like a serial killer. Which is not further played up again in the film. It's not addressed later in the film, at least as far as I can recall. But then Vincent Hanna goes back to the restaurant, and he sees his wife there alone, and it's almost empty. And they have this discussion, and Justine has this speech about how you are among the dead. You search your terrain. I'm paraphrasing. And there's a little line that she says in the sort of earlier version where she says, you sift through the detritus. And I always found that line to be very peculiar because, there's a lot to be said about the dialogue. And there's a lot of lines that I would say are very much, they feel very literary rather than feeling very real or earthy. And I think that's part of the point. Not all the dialogue, I think, is meant to be realistic. I think some of it's meant to be a literary type of feeling. And so Justine, when she says, you sift through the detritus, I always thought that was a really peculiar line. When I saw it, I was thinking to myself, what is detritus? I had no idea what detritus meant. And so I had to look it up later. And I found the meaning, and it was interesting. But in the Director's Definitive Edition, if you go to that scene, you won't find any line, you sift through the detritus, because it's been cut out. I think it's been replaced by a quick shot of Vincent, the cutaway to Vincent, and goes back to her. I think that's right. So that was an interesting thing. I always thought, oh gosh, there's no mentioning of detritus. So, but there's one difference. The other difference I noticed was where Vincent Hanna is meeting the Hank Azaria character and who's in Las Vegas, and this. He says, "Oh, you don't have jurisdiction here," and he says, and right, and he has the Las Vegas police there, and he says, it has all this entire thing about you were extradited to Newark for what if he did what he's trying to get him for smuggling cigarettes from North Carolina or something like that, or you come and help with us, cut and dried. That is it, right? So. And then there's the whole thing about, of course, Vincent Hanna and his unit want to essentially use Hank Azaria's character, the Marciano character, because of his relationship with Charlene Scheherles, right? The woman who is the wife of Chris Scheherles, the Val Kilmer character, and so they want to use him to get to her, to use her as leverage to try to get to Chris, and so that's the connection. And then I don't. There's a little bit of profanity in the scene, so I don't want to repeat it, but Hank Azaria says, why did it get mixed up with that B word? And then Vincent Hanna, Al Pacino, has one of his most, let's say, memorable, explosive moments as an actor in this film. And he says, because she has a gray and he says all this thing about all this explosive stuff. And one of the things he says in there is he says the line, "Ferocious, aren't I?" And he says this, when I think of and then so that scene, he says the line, "Ferocious, aren't I?" But in the definitive director's version or whatever, that line is cut out. You don't hear it, it's blanked out. And so I never understood that. I never understood why that particular line, "Ferocious, aren't I?" Was altered or cut out for purposes of the director's definitive edition. I thought it was a really good line, actually, because it really shows not just how explosive Vincent Hanna's character can be. He's quite abrupt in terms of his outbursts. Remember when he's talking to the character Albert one morning, one of the what do you call it, CIs or confidential informants, so CIs. And Albert was supposed to contact him the night before, but he didn't. So that really got Vincent upset. And so he and I think it was Sergeant Drucker go to his little junkyard the next morning, and suddenly Al Pacino's there with his slicked back hair because it's the morning. That's an interesting look because I think that's the only time we see him with slicked back hair. We always see him with his hair sort of in that the combed way or something. So I always thought that'd be an interesting look. I always wondered why that scene we saw him with the slick back hair. But anyway, what does he say? He's just trying to get information, and he just says suddenly, give me what you got, give me, something like that. So he just has this sudden, almost quite unforeseeable outbursts sometimes, and this was one of them. But during the outburst with the Hank Azaria character, that line, "Ferocious, aren't I?" is not there. And I love that line because it's also a kind of self-reflexive line that Vincent Hanna had, right? Because not only was he prone to these outbursts, but he kind of knew that he was prone to these outbursts. And so it was almost like he knew that he was putting on a show, or he was using it to try to get his targets off balance, so to speak. And I think that sort of "ferocious, aren't I?" is a direct reference to himself. And he is a ferocious, but he also is acknowledging that it's kind of an act. But I always liked that line, but I always wondered why it was always omitted for this definitive director's version. But oh well, it's a very minor omission, I suppose. One of the things I always thought they would fix, but they didn't, was there is a scene towards the end when Waingro is in the hotel, and it's the 17th floor, and on the opposite side of the Waingro's in one room, and then on the other side of the hall in one of the rooms we've got the police surveillance. They've got the surveillance hooked up everywhere, and when I think Vincent is calling in to each of the surveillance points, checking to see if Neil has somehow showed up. He says, no one showed up, And he calls to that surveillance room on the 17th floor across from where Waingro's room is. And the guy who's in the surveillance, if you notice, he doesn't say Waingro, he says Wango. He calls him Wango, I think. And I always thought, if you're going to make changes, don't take out the Pacino line, "Ferocious, aren't I?" instead, what you should change the way that the guy pronounces the name Wango, because I think it's supposed to be pronounced Wangro. It's not Wango, but oh well. This is all to say, of course, that there are some differences between the versions, and so if you are looking for a kind of maybe definitive version of it, I would suggest trying also to look for earlier releases, DVD, VHS, Laserdisc, and the like, and just try to catch up with the film that way. Again, they are minor, and so I don't think they affect the overall effect of the film. And so, if you're interested in if that stuff doesn't bother you, then I think you're very okay. You're more than okay. I think you're very well served with the recent, let's say, Blu-ray releases of this film. But if you're interested in all the versions of the film, I would suggest trying to hunt down earlier releases if you can, because again, it's pretty interesting. And again, I can't think of another film that uses the word detritus. So if you're looking for the version of the film that uses the detritus, then I suggest trying to get one of the earlier versions. But anyway, that's just my own sort of opening salvo of the film, but I'll get to details about the film in a second. But before we do go through that, let me just go to the live chat and we will go in earnest. I hope the picture quality is okay here. Okay, so let me just go to the live chat and then we will start in earnest here. So we have a lot of people here. So Andre is here, hello. Elliot Cohen is here, hello. Ryan Chataway is here. Ryan Chataway, cinephile and vlogger, hello. Let's see, Cooper Glover 1972 is here, hello. Sculder 22, hello my friend. Ben is here, Ben Vanas is here. Don Pride, hello, good morning. Don and Shelley, so my regards to Shelley, Don. I hope you two are well, my friends. Michael Hewitt, hello. Michael Hewitt, oh great, good afternoon. I had the pleasure of meeting Danny Trejo, and he said to me, Heat is the best crime movie of the 90s. He is not wrong, amazing. Oh, Danny Trejo. I love his performance. His performance, he is, what's his name in the film? He is so epic and iconic that it's his name. His character's name is Trejo, and so that's really amazing. I always thought that he was, of course, his character was given probably the least amount of time, which is a real. On the one hand, it's a real shame, but also it at the same time, I always thought it was kind of cool because he was given the most mystery. And I think the more time is spent with this crew, the more we realize how human and fallible and quite sometimes for some of them actually, like Michael Chirito, I think the way he goes out, I think is really sad, very pathetic, and also quite monstrous. You know, after the shootout and he grabs the kid and that sort of thing. It's almost a monstrous thing, and so he dies like. His character dies like almost a sad, pathetic, monstrous person, but he also is seen as being almost fallible. The same is true for Chris, the Val Kilmer character. I think the more we spend time with him, the more we realize how sensitive and also how maybe not unbalanced, I don't want to use that word, but he is quite emotionally attached to his wife, of course, and so when that is removed, or when that is under threat, that is when he is becoming even more, how should I put it, for lack of a better word, unstable. I know that's not the case because there is a certain emotional stability that his character has that perhaps rivals that of, say, Neil McCauley. And I think there's an interesting contrast. But my point is that the more time we spend with the crew, the more we realize how kind of human they are. But with Danny Trejo's character, we don't spend that much time with him. We get a little bit of his goings on. He's a very important component of the crew. And remember after they realize that they've got heat on them, when they're trying to break into that, with respect, it was Neil's plan to break into the place in the middle and do the drilling, and then by that time Vincent's team was there, and they had the police there, and then they're hiding in the abandoned trucks in the back there in the parking lot, and one of the cops with the glasses sat down and his gun that he strapped down made a little dent, and then everyone panicked, and he knew that they were given away, and so that indicated to Neil that there was heat on them. And and right, that was where Val Kilmer's character said, "Oh, maybe it's not us. Maybe it's the." And he's chewing his gum. "Oh, maybe it's not us. Maybe it's the place." It's been hit a couple of times. And then Neil says at that meeting, assuming they got our phones, assuming our houses, assuming they got us here right now, everything, assume it all. And then at that meeting, they have to decide whether they want to go forward with the bank heist plan, Kelso's bank heist plan or not, especially now that they have heat on them, and they're wondering, well, what are they going to do with Van Zandt? What are they going, with all this heat on, do you want to play World War II on the streets with Van Zandt and that sort of thing? So they're trying to figure out if they want to do the bank heist or not, and it's a big payday. And so there's a lot riding on this, and so they're trying to make the decision. And Neil says, "Do we go for it, or do we walk away from here? 30 seconds flat. We are gone in our separate ways." And he asks them one at a time, starting with Chris. And Chris, of course, says, "The bank is worth the risk. I need it, brother." And then he asks Michael Cheritto, "Is this the right thing to do?" And we find out in that moment, of course, that this big, tough guy, Michael Cheritto, is really actually almost emotionally dependent on Neil. And he says, I roll with you, Neil, whatever. And then Neil has to be very firm with him and say, no, not this time. This time you're on your own. You've got to make the decision on your own. And then while Neil's trying to almost cajole him or coax him out of it and say, you've got enough saved up, you've got real estate and you've got other investments, I'd steer clear of this. And then Michael then retorts and he says, well, for me, the action is the juice and I'm in. And so he makes a decision to go for it. And then they ask Trejo, and he says, what about you? And Trejo's just standing there. They don't even give him a close-up. It's a long shot. He says, yeah, all right, let's do it. And that's it. And so I always thought that was a really, that was almost, it's almost like he was too cool for getting too much emphasis on his character. He was actually a really cool component of the crew. And then what happened to his character, how there was heat on him at the time of the heist, and he couldn't shake them off, and we actually realized that this was actually the workings of Waingro backed by Van Zandt, and it was a really dastardly thing to do to try to get information about what they were planning. And eventually the tip-off was given by Van Zandt's henchman, Henry Rawlings, right? And so, and that led to the whole disaster and the really horrific, quite suspenseful, one of the most really pulse-pounding, suspenseful shootouts in modern cinematic memory, in my view. Really quite an amazing, enthralling, dangerous, vicious shootout, and the guns and everything like that. But right from the beginning, with the whole calm, and you get the shots of Edie packing. I think it's something because she's decided by that point to go to New Zealand with Neil after just having, I think, 2 encounters with him. She just suddenly decides to go with him, and then cuts to Ashley Judd's character and their son, Dominic, and then suddenly goes to the wonderful pulsating rhythm of that percussion score, and we get a shot. It's imperceptible, but it is a slow motion shot of Neil walking through the doors of the bank. What was it, 11:30? And then we suddenly get other shots of Chris walking in and then Michael walking in, and I love it. That Neil and Robert De Niro has that cool, very elegant walk about him, and then when Michael Cheritto walks in, you can see that he's got something under his coat. It's very, very conspicuous, and so you can tell that he has an automatic weapon under his suit there. So it's interesting how he was able to walk by without the security guards noticing him. But that's another point entirely. But let's see, what was I saying? So Danny Trejo and what happens to him at the end there, which is really sad, and how he essentially had to give them up. because Waingro was essentially torturing him and his Anna, his love, and what happened to the both of them was really quite sad. And that leads to sort of the final act of the film. But yeah, Danny Trejo is really, I think, one of the coolest parts of this. This is a really cool film. Michael Hewitt, thank you very much for that. I'm very, very jealous that you had the opportunity to meet him. Twisted Razor, hello. Let's see, just skipping the comments here. Wolfgratz is here. Our dear friend Wolfgratz is here. Hello. Let's see. And Ryan Chataway, Cinephile Vlogger. I'll call you Ryan Chataway, but your full name is Ryan Chataway, Cinephile and Vlogger. You say, I really, 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 so 3 reallys, like Heat. 4.5 out of 5 film for me, but I love Man's The Insider more. That's another great film. Let's see here. Razor Wire Reviews. Luke is here. I'm never going back. Then don't take down scores. You do what you do best. What is it? No. I do what I do best. I take scores. You do what you do best. Try to stop guys like me. And you never wanted a regular type life. What the f is that, right? Barbecues and ball games. Yeah, this regular type of life. That your life, right? That my life? No, my life is a disaster zone. I could go on and on. Sorry. So let's see, just continuing on here. Okay, and let's see here. Okay, Gloin the Hobbit is here. Daisuke, hello from sunny Hawaii. That's great. Bill R. Hey everybody, this is my favorite film from my favorite director. I am a video editor and I did a video on Mann's films. You can find it if you search The Cinema of Michael Mann. Well, thank you very much, Bill R. So we can do a search of The Cinema of Michael Mann to check out Bill R.'s video on YouTube, because he is obviously a fan of Michael Mann in this film. Thank you very much for sharing that. Hopefully people can look that up. Great. Let's see. Wolfgrat says, I will say the LAPD need to spend more time at target practice. Do they recruit from the Star Trooper rejects? Well, that's an interesting point. Although Vincent Hanna does show that he has a very good eye. Like, he has a very, very good eye. And he is laser focused. And not only in terms of his use of firearms, but also in terms of his work ethic. I mean, he is one of the most laser-focused characters in this film, matched perhaps only by Neil McCauley himself. But let's see. Okay, here we go. Belton Brosger, GR, 1819 when I saw it in the cinema. Oh, great. So we're probably around the similar age. I'm not sure. Maybe you saw it in 95, just like me. Based on the trailer, I was expecting an action movie. Years later, I saw it again. Finally, I got it. The heat was in the characters and not so much in the action. Well, that's an interesting way of describing it. Thank you very much for mentioning that, because that will bring me to my next point, which is that this is a film that is really about character. And it's amazing how character-driven this is. The bulk of the film is, what is it? It's just shy of 3 hours. It's about 2 hours and 50 minutes or so, I think. And so there are some really suspenseful and exhilarating action set pieces from one of the early set pieces when the crew attacked the van, and that whole disaster debacle happens with Waingro and killing one of the officers, and then them having to in a really savage way kill the rest of the people. Very cold-blooded, very, very terrible. But that then leads. That is the catalyst, or that is the starting point, if you will, for the proceedings of the film, because that leads to Waingro's involvement in the film. He gets away. How he got away from them, I still have no idea. He doesn't seem to me to be a person that has these great, extraordinary skills of escape or anything like that. If anything, he seems to be less skilled than Neil, Chris, and Michael, and Trejo. But oh well, I mean, we need to have a film, do we not? And so that becomes, I mean, if he didn't escape, then we wouldn't have had the events unfold the way they did, of course. But so I suppose it was necessary for purposes of the plot. But and we have other set pieces along the way, of course, but it's mostly to do with character. But when I say character, it is relationships. The relationships and how the characters relate to each other and amongst each other. That is at, I think, the core of this, and I think that's what your comment is getting at, or at least that's how you interpret your comment. So we have to keep in mind all the relationships that are at play here. Now, to keep this in mind, I think in my head, I always try to classify or subcategorize the film into two groups. It's pretty simple, right? We have the police side led by Vincent Hanna, Al Pacino, and that whole network of characters there. And then we have the criminal side, Neil McCauley, Robert De Niro, and that element. And I still think basically we can divide the group of characters, the universe of characters, into these two groups. So let's start with the Vincent Hanna, Al Pacino character side, the good guys. So the main characters, we have Al Pacino and his own MCU unit. So we have, what is it? Bosco, Casals, and Drucker, and Schwartz, I think. Bosco, incidentally, is played by Ted Levine, which is a very interesting turn. Just a few years earlier, of course, he was in the film The Silence of the Lambs, but that's it. And Wes Studi is also here, and it's a very almost a very refined performance. Especially when we consider some of the performances that we saw from him in other Michael Mann films. It's a real amazing performance. This crew is quite amazing. They have their own relationships. We see in one of the scenes, which I would actually classify as being maybe one of the weaker elements of the film, and I'll try to get to that later. There's a moment in the film where we actually see a party, and we see each of the men with their either wives or dates or girlfriends or whatever. I think it's meant to show that they are human, or they have a kind of, they have relationships in their personal lives. And of course, the main relationship that we're focusing in on is the relationship between Al Pacino's Vincent and his now third wife, Justine, the Diane Venora character. And also her daughter, Lauren, who is, I suppose, Vincent's stepdaughter, played by Natalie Portman. And so that we have this relationship here. Now, I think the main, one of the important relationships is in the film is that between Justine, the wife, and Vincent. And we see the push and pull in their relationship. They have, of course, from the outset, we understand that they are very, it's very clear that they are attracted to each other. They have a sexual attraction to each other, quite obvious from the outset of the film. But then their relationship is further developed in the film, or further illuminated by the film's progress, when we see how there is a kind of almost lack of 100% connection in their dialogue. It's laid out very, very subtly, but very cleverly in the very first dialogue scene between the two. It's a morning scene, and Vincent is getting ready to go to work, and Natalie Portman's character comes in. I think Justine is still in bed, and Justine, I'll make coffee. And Vincent said, no time, I got to go to work. And then Lauren's character comes in. Lauren comes in, and there's the whole reveal about her father, and how her father is never really around for her, and how she is always disappointed, and that sort of thing. And then she says, the wife says, shall I make coffee again? It's no time, gotta go, and that's so there's always there's a little bit of an imbalance, which is really quite fascinating. We have Justine focusing in kind of on Vincent, but Vincent not necessarily catching on. Shall I make coffee? No time. And then Vincent kind of focusing in on Lauren, but Lauren is focusing in on her own father. And so it's an interesting dynamic already set up. Like each character is focused in on another character, who's then focused in on another character. So never the twain shall meet, which is, I think, such a perfect almost setup and metaphor for the rest of that particular side of the film's characterizations and how it will work out. Because it's really the lack of their inability to connect with each other that causes such friction. There is an almost an inability for instance, a scene that closely follows this, which is a morning scene with mother and daughter, and we'll look, there she's looking for something, and the mother's just reading the newspaper or something, and she's not really paying attention, just saying yes, yes, but not really paying attention. And then the daughter just suddenly really freaks out, and she says, I'm going to be late, I can't be late. And we understand that there is something quite deeply rooted in her worry and concern, which seems to be related to the fact that her real father isn't around for her, which then leads to very, very dark and quite disturbing results toward the end of the film, and the decisions that the young girl makes, which is a very harrowing and sad and quite a shocking decision. But my point is that even in these early scenes, we get a sense of the characters not necessarily connecting. They seem to want to connect with each other, but not really. Or there isn't any sense of bad faith on any of the actors' part. It's just that they just can't connect. And even when they try, there is a sense of something not quite right. And even between mother and daughter, there is a sense of something not quite right. Maybe the mother is really trying her best. And we see this in the way that she reacts when, at the very end of the film, when Vincent brings the daughter to the hospital after that terrible thing that she's done. And we see the mother's reaction. She's just horrified. She said, look what she did to herself. Look what she did to herself, which is one of the toughest lines to listen to in the film. A parent having to say that about her own child is just quite a heartbreaking moment. And so that is proof positive that she really loves her daughter. Of course she does. Of course she loves her daughter. But even in these early scenes, there is a kind of disconnect there, unintentional perhaps, but there it is. And even between husband and wife, there's a kind of disconnect that will, of course, play itself out in later scenes. And we see that Justine is concerned or frustrated that Vincent is not there. Not only is he not there, he is called off to work, and he doesn't share any of his stuff or his experience with her. It's not as though that she wants to have him explain all the terrible things that's going on. And in fact, he says it in the restaurant scene between the two of them. He says, when we got together, I told you that you had to share me with all the bad people in the world. Or I'm paraphrasing. He essentially, they have an argument about him not being there, and then at the end it sort of comes to fruition, and they decide in a kind of mutual way that they aren't right for each other. They can't be together because Vincent borrows her line that she used against him earlier in the film, and he says, it's a very memorable line in the film, and he says, you're right when you said that all I am is what I'm going after. And so there's these disconnects in the relationships, and I find that these disconnects really highlight certain characteristics of the character, and we realize therefore that Vincent is someone who has empathy. He obviously has concern for his stepdaughter, and he has this way of trying to almost telepathically try to comfort people and comfort strangers. We see him hugging the mother of the young woman, the prostitute who was found murdered, we understand by Waingro, and we see that really harrowing moment when he's just hugging her and the music swells, and it's very, very painful. We also see a similar thing where he does the same thing to Justine, the wife, after Lauren has come into the hospital, and there's this way that he has in trying to deal with situations without words, but in terms of just hugging and human connection, which is a really interesting choice because Al Pacino, as you know, is an actor who is known for his outbursts, his acting outbursts. And the way that he uses words and language is very colorful, especially in this film. But it's these powerful, poignant moments when he's just hugging people and not saying a word and letting the moment speak for itself, which I think is equally as powerful. But it also goes to show that it's almost like he cannot communicate with these people in words. He can only do so in these moments of crisis. But when the crisis is averted, he doesn't have a function. And so it's almost like he has to be a loner, or in other words, the only time he is able to make connections is through these crisis moments. And that's what he says to Justine earlier. It's the angst that makes him sharp where he has to be. You know, what is he? It keeps him sharp where I have to be. You know, that sort of thing. He does he does the thing with the snapping his fingers. And so that's what he says. He needs his angst. And when it's over, then it's over. So I find the character development here utterly reliant on how we see the relationships develop. And so this is, I think, just a very broad or very simplified way for me to say that for the cop side, this is very important. Now for the other side, the Robert De Niro side, or the criminal side, we have a similar kind of lattice work going on here. So we have Neil and his crew, Chris, Michael, and Trejo, and then by extension, we have Breeden, who kind of comes in almost randomly. You don't quite know what his role is, and obviously he's trying to work. He's obviously been in jail, so he's an ex-con, but he's trying to make a living for himself, even though his new job with the uncredited role by Bud Cort is not really going well for him, and he's almost losing his dignity as a man. But he is part of this network, if you will, of criminals or ex-cons, and we see each of the relationships that they have. Chris with Charlene, and Neil, of course, with Edie, and we don't get a sense of, Michael and his, I guess it's wife or girlfriend, I think it's wife, and then Trejo, and his wife or girlfriend, I think it's wife as well, Anna, and so we get their relationships off the bat, not off the bat, but we get their relationships early on in the film. And it's not only the relationships with the women in their lives, but it's the relationship among the men and how they form this unit. They are so close, apparently, that they have dinner with each other, which I find also to be almost a flaw in the film. You know, there's a very interesting moment when they're all having dinner, and this is noticeable because this is after the moment when Van Zandt essentially betrayed them. He was supposed to give the payoff for the bonds that they stole at the beginning of the film. So they stole the bonds. Van Zandt would be able to get 100% of the money value of the bonds back because they were insured. And then Nate, the fence, the middleman, the John Voight character, arranged for Neil and company to sell the bonds back to Van Zandt under the table at a fraction of their value, but still it meant that he would get the bonds back and he would be able to make a little fortune because he would still get the insurance proceeds. But Van Zandt still decided, I'm going to get rid of these guys, and he tried to kill them, but the plan went through, and so they had that little that famous scene where Neil is calling and he says, what am I doing? I'm talking to an empty telephone because there's a dead man on the other end of this effing line. And so, and then we go to the scene of the restaurant, and they're all together, and with their families or with the women in their lives, except Neil, of course. Neil is conspicuously alone, but seeing all these people and his crew with the people that they love, we see them, and they are very happy, and so this makes him want to give a call to Edie. And I love the line, and then she thought it was just the one night, and he says, not for me, it wasn't. And I love what he says. I love the line he says. It's not like, can I stop by? He says, can I fall by? Can I fall by? I always found that line to be so memorable for some reason. Can I fall by? That feels so intimate. it's not the word choice that I would use if I wanted to call someone and say, can I stop by later? I would say, can I stop by later? But he says, can I fall by? There's a nice almost poetry to that line. I don't know, but my point is that this is the moment where we see, this is the moment they had to have the dinner at this precise moment, didn't they? Because at this precise moment, after they're leaving the restaurant, we have Vincent and his MCU unit basically staring them down. I mean, they've been under surveillance all this time, and that's where all the police get all the information, because they had the tip off about Slick and Michael Sciarrito from what is it, the Tone Loc character, and then this tips them off to Slick and Michael Sciarrito, and lo and behold, at this precise moment, Michael Sciarrito and crew decide to have a get together, and they're going to get together prior to performing a number of their big scores. So I would think, why would they do this? Neil, he wouldn't do this. He wouldn't do this. This seems like an error to me, and a kind of flaw. And I understand in terms of the narrative needed this, because up to this point, Vincent and his MCU unit didn't have a lead. The only lead they had was Slick and then Michael Sciarrito, but that was it. They couldn't link Michael to any other members of the crew. Well, now with this dinner, then they could, and then that leads into the rest of the narrative. So I understand its importance as a narrative milestone, if you will, but I suppose as a plot point, I always found that to be a little bit of a weak point. I never thought Neil would agree to something like that, getting together like that, especially so close to performing an actual score. You know what I mean? But anyway, I know that's important for the plot, because then that means that the Vincent can surveil the other members of the crew, and that leads to the crisscross and all that interesting interplay. But we have the relationships here, and we have also Neil and Edie being, I think, the prime relationship. They meet by chance, and the relationship is very, very short. Their courtship is very, very short. They get together almost immediately. I think it's by the second meeting that Neil proposes that she go away with him to New Zealand, pack up everything, go away with New Zealand, and he has and he says, I've got nothing except, I want to be with you. And so suddenly, up to now, he's been very almost, Vincent describes him, what are you, a monk? Because he's been almost like an ascetic in terms of having a severe discipline, all up to the point where he doesn't even have furniture in his own home. And he's got this whole ethic about if the need arises to have to get up and leave, 30 seconds flat, if you feel the heat around the corner, then he has to do so. And so it almost seems to be antithetical to his whole purpose in life up to now, to try to have a relationship with someone such as Edie, especially someone whom he's very recently met. But it is very consistent with what we understand Neil to be going through. We understand that he is trying to get out for some reason. And we also get this in the coffee, the diner scene between Vincent and Neil, when they're talking about their dreams, and Vincent mentions the dream about all the victims of all the crimes he's investigated. They're all sitting around the dinner table, and they're all disfigured, and it's a really disturbing scene, but they don't say anything. And then Neil says he has a dream where I have a dream where I'm drowning, and I have to wake myself up or I'll die in my sleep. And then Vincent asks, you know what that's about? And then Neil says, yeah, having enough time. And then Vincent says, enough time to do what it is you want to do. And Neil says, that's right. And Vincent says, are you doing that now? And Neil says, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. That is very, very important, because it's so subtle, and yet it says so much, which is that what he has in his life now is not enough, and he wants to get away. That's the crux. And so we see, therefore, that what he has up to now has not been emotionally fulfilling for him. I think that's the interpretation that one can have. It's been very successful for him, of course. We see that he's saved enough money to go away and that sort of thing. But in terms of emotional fulfillment, that's another question entirely. And I think the Edie relationship, therefore, provides a perfect the perfect way to set up the paradox that is the Neil Macaulay character. He is almost the perfect criminal machine, and yet he needs, or maybe another way to put it, he succumbs to his need for emotional fulfillment in his life. And I find that paradox to be utterly satisfying in terms of a narrative progression and a character development, a character arc, and also very, very tragic, especially how the film ends and his storyline ends. And so this is all to say that the relationships in both sides, of course, I mean, it's an obvious point that I'm making, but please let me make that point, even though it is very obvious, which is to say that the relationships and the relationships between and among the characters is at the heart of this film. We have a lot of action set pieces, of course. We have an unbelievable shootout, one of the most unbelievable shootouts in modern history, cinematic history, of course. And then we've got the whole setup and the machismo cool that each of the characters struts around with, and in particular the two leads, Pacino and De Niro. And some of their dialogue is really just so utterly cool. It's one of my favorites is, I've said this before on this channel, but I'm going to get this wrong, so if I get it wrong, please forgive me. But one of the ones, I'm from memory, but it's the diner scene. It says, De Niro says, do you see me doing thrill-seeking liquor store holdups with a Born to Lose tattoo on my chest? And if someone said that to me, if I were in Vincent Hanna's position, I would just burst out laughing. Because I think, who would say this? Who would say this in real life? Well, Neil Macaulay would say this. And of course, Vincent Hanna understands this language because he doesn't laugh. He's just very serious. He says, no, I do not. I love that. That's a great line. But yeah, so there's a lot of cool dialogue, there's a lot of cool machismo stuff, there's a lot of cool action, of course. But the heart of this film is the relationships and the characters, and the relationships between and among the characters. And they fuel this film to its sort of inexorable conclusion, which is, I think, very, very moving, very poignant, and very sad. In terms of the way that the characters almost mirror each other. I'm talking about Vincent and Neil, but I'll get to that in a second. But let me now go to the live chat, and then we will go from there. So thank you very much, Belton Brosker, for the great comment. I hope you're well. Alan Negrello's here. Hello, it's nice to see you. Cooper Glover, 1972, says the cinematography seems monochromatic to make the colors seem almost black and white. Cinematography, Dante Spinotti. So it's a very interesting color palette, that's for sure. And just like blues, whites, and blacks. Che Guevara 9, hi Daisuke, sorry I'm late. Not a problem at all, my friend, not a problem. Let's see, I'm just skipping down. Jared is here, our dear friend Jared, hello. Let's see. Just skipping around here. Cooper Glover, 1972, says the pacing was a little slow here and there, but I still liked it. I think the De Niro and Pacino characters can't relate to other people, but just their professions. Yes, I think that's a very good way of putting it. Alan says, love the extent to which man is dedicated to showing the personal and professional lives of characters. Even the character who ends up being their last-minute getaway driver gets a backstory. Yes, that's indeed the case. That is also Breeden, right? That's also very interesting. It's very random in terms of how it's first introduced in the film, is it not? And we're almost wondering exactly how is this going to relate, and it does relate. And at the point it relates, it's over, which is I think it's a very almost experimental way to tell a story or to portray information like that. So I thought it was quite a bold move. Cinema Dave Media is here. Hello. I really loved this movie, especially to see Pacino and De Niro together. Nice to see them reunite in The Irishman. Yes, I hope that you and your family are safe and well. Thank you very much, my friend. And keep up the great work with Tarkovsky and other works, of course. Let's see. Wolfgratz. Well, De Niro related to Chris, didn't he? He went to a lot of trouble for him, both as regards his relationship and getting him out. Yes, that's true. De Niro has a certain regard for Chris Shiherlis. There's a scene where we see De Niro talking or on the payphone, contacting Van Zandt for that first time in order to arrange the exchange. And at the time, we see him looking across the way. We don't quite know what he's looking at. I think he's got sunglasses on at the time, so he might just be looking stoically away as he's waiting. But we realize actually that he's looking at a motel across the way there, and he sees Charlene walking out with a man who is not Chris, and so that gets him very excited, very angry. In fact, and I love the way he sets it up. If you notice, it cuts to the inside of that motel room, and Charlene is still there. She's getting ready to go, I assume, and then we see the window, and we see the little push cart of, I think, the cleaning person's push cart or something. So it's almost like a distraction of De Niro to maybe catch the person off guard, and he just barges in, and he goes to and he just almost confronts her, and then he can't contain his anger at one point, so he just does that little swipe of all the coat hangers there, and he says, you've given one last chance, and if he messes up, then I will pay for you myself. I will pay for you and Dominic to get away myself. And my word is believe me in my word. I'm paraphrasing here. Clean up, go home. Clean up, go home. That's what he says. But I love that too, because this is actually going to bring me to my next point, which is parallels and patterns. That is an example of a pattern in this film. We see a lot of patterns of characters barging into rooms quite unexpectedly. And in this case, this is also very interesting because we will see the same pattern of Neil barging into a motel room or hotel room again later on in the film. Very memorably, of course, when we see him essentially breaking into the room to eliminate Waingro and to exact revenge for everything that Waingro has caused him and his friends. And even the tactic of Neil getting into both of the rooms with Charlene in the motel and Waingro in the hotel later is very similar. He dons a jacket to make him look like a member of the staff in the hotel in the latter half of the film. And here in the early part of the film, he does the thing with the cart, again, almost mimicking or pretending like he works for the hotel or the motel to get the people off guard. And so that's a little tactic that he does, which is very interesting. And that's a kind of pattern that we see him performing. We also see, interestingly enough, that pattern repeated, if you recall, by Vincent. And it was the Henry Rollins character, what was his name? Hugh Benny. And remember that it was Hugh Benny who was a CI, and Hugh Benny is also the right-hand man, I guess, or he's security or whatever. He works for Van Zandt. And we understand that it was Hugh Benny who gave the tip-off to the police about the bank heist. And then so they had to go to Hugh Benny in order to figure out what the heck was going on. And then that was where Vincent and his MCU unit essentially broke into. One of the police shot the hinges off the door and they broke in. And then they had a little tussle. And then Vincent overpowered him, and that was it. So that's another example of a character breaking into a room and really overpowering someone inside. This time, it wasn't Neil or the criminal side of the film, but it was, what's his name? It was Vincent and the cop side of the film. And in fact, it's very interesting. There's even a further patterning going on here, because if you recall, in that scene where Vincent breaks in and he confronts the Van Zandt's henchman there, there's a little moment where he really essentially manhandles him. He grabs him by the face. It's a pretty violent scene, but there's a moment where the camera is actually up close on Henry Rollins' face as he's being manhandled here, and it's a really quick moment, but it's almost like one of those things. I know it's probably not like this, but it's almost like the camera was strapped or fixed on his head, and so we get a little camera shot of Henry Rollins' head as he's being manhandled like this. And if you remember, there is a similar shot where Neil breaks into the 17th floor hotel room. The Marquis Airport Hotel, I think, and it was when he's essentially manhandling Waingro after he essentially kicks the door in, and it knocks Waingro in the face square on. And then we see Neil, what is it? He knocks him on the head quite forcefully and brutally with the butt of the pistol. And so it's that moment we actually see a similar shot of the camera on Waingro's face as he's being beaten up. Before the ultimate kill, of course, but it's another pattern or parallel patterning that's going on, and it doesn't occur a lot of times, but it occurs during these moments again when characters are breaking in and assaulting or attacking the person inside in a very physically violent way. And so I think that patterning is very interesting, because not only do we see patterns within Neil's own storyline itself, but we also see patterns that are cross-referential. In other words, the pattern of one main character is also repeated or experienced by another main character. So it's almost like Neil and Vincent are linked in this visual way, in the way that they are repeating the same actions, and the actions themselves are not just only repeated actions, but they are shot in an almost similar or almost exact way, which is very, very interesting. There's another moment of patterning or paralleling, which I think is also very significant. It's very. I mentioned it earlier, but in the early part, after Van Zant's double cross didn't go as Van Zant had planned, we have the call that Neil makes to Van Zant's office, and he makes it from the kitchen of the restaurant or something, and he says, he has that very famous line, what am I doing? I'm talking to an empty telephone. So he says, I'm talking to an empty telephone. We get a clear shot of straight on of De Niro's face as he's on the phone. Is really menacing, a superb De Niro facial expression, as only De Niro can do it, of course. But later on in the film, if you remember, it's not quite the same dramatic situation, mind you, but it's the moment where Vincent is on the phone, and he's got the communication from Sergeant Drucker, who is by this point in the film in the sort of safe house with Charlene, and they're trying to get Chris. And so they want to use her as bait to get Chris. And so they think that Chris will stop by. And so they says, oh, we've got one, and we've got the car coming in. And we see, and she's asked to go out to the ledge and essentially call him in. And so Drucker's got everyone on the phone. And I think that moment we cut to Al Pacino's face, and he's on the phone. It's silent, and everyone's just like, "What's going to happen?" And so that's another moment. That's almost like Al Pacino. It's almost like he is actually on an empty telephone, because everyone is just waiting. What's going to happen? There's no dialogue. There's no conversation. It's just him waiting. So it's like earlier when De Niro's actually saying as a threat, "I'm talking to an empty telephone." Well, here it's almost like Al Pacino's actually doing it. He's actually actualizing what De Niro was actually saying as a threat to Van Zant, which I think was really fascinating. And I think that actualization is really quite narratively clever, because we understand by the end of the scene that Chris gets away because of Charlene's signal that she gives, which is such a great moment. I love that moment. Ashley Judd's performance, what a great performance she gives. It's such a difficult performance, but she does it so well. And you can tell there's a kind of, she gives the character a kind of tired, almost desperate feel, but also one that obviously she loves her son, and she is essentially roped into this safe house by Drucker and the police because essentially Drucker says, uses Dominic as the kind of the way to convince her to help them out, and it's actually kind of a cruel way, if you think about it, using the son in order to try to get her to help them out, and she goes out on the ledge and she gives that moment. It's wordless. And there's so much distance physically between the two of them, we can imagine, but she gives that the close-up of her hand. It's her. It would be her left hand, and she goes like this from this to this, and just goes like that. It's very subtle, but it's very effective. I remember my mother; she saw the film with me in the theater, and after the theater, after that show, she would always quote that moment. She'd just go like, "No, that's such a great moment." Yeah, so my point that is that yeah, so Vincent is on an empty telephone. It's so empty that what he's waiting for ends up bearing no fruit because Chris gets away. So it really is an empty telephone that he's talking to. So I think that's a really great parallel that I find interesting. But if I can talk about this for a second, not only is there parallel action or parallel narrative dialogue or whatever that we see. But there's also a kind of mirror imaging. They're almost opposites. And we see this also, I think, expressed, of course, very directly, confrontationally. Is that a word? I'm not sure. But at the very famous coffee scene, the diner scene, they're sitting on opposite ends of the table. They have a similar kind of posture. They carry themselves differently, of course. The way that they speak is a little bit different, of course. But they haven't met face to face up to then. They have had encounters with each other, of course. There was the encounter when first it was when the crew was trying to break in. It wasn't the bank, but I think it was Neil's own thing, having to do with metals or something. And he was trying to get into the thing, and there was drilling. And this is where one of the cops made the fatal flaw of making a noise as he tried to sit down, giving their position away. And then that very famous moment, and the music heightens to a very piercing note, and it keeps it there, sustained tension. And we have close-ups, and we have the surveillance monitor of Neil suddenly looking, and then cuts to Vincent, and then cuts to an actual shot of De Niro, and it goes back to Vincent, and we go back to a shot of the monitor. And the monitor is a surveillance, almost like it's kind of like a heat detection camera. So it's almost like it's a reversal. Everything that is, it's like a reversal or reversed image. So I found that to be very fascinating because it's like Vincent is representing the positive in terms of the representation of positivity and light, and then Neil is the opposite of that, not just in terms of cops and robbers, but also visually. He is sort of his image is flipped. Everything that's black is white, and everything that's white becomes black. So it's almost like their positions are polar opposites, both in terms of career and characters, but also visually in that moment. And that's an example of the mirroring. There are opposites, and then they sit together in the diner. And of course they have similarities, but they are opposites. And then they go off in their separate directions. They converge, and then they go off and they converge, of course, again by the end. But along the way, we see that they are mirror images, or perhaps to put it another way, Vincent is like the positive energy, and then Neil is like the negative energy. As I was trying to suggest earlier, Neil has the suit. He's almost seen almost always wearing the gray suit and the white shirt without a tie. He's got and he's got the facial hair, whereas Vincent has no facial hair. He's got a dark suit, but he's got a dark shirt, and he wears a tie almost all the time. So there's a sort of fashion opposites going on there. It's mirror imaging, of course, but it's still opposites. And then, of course, there's this idea of Neil not having any furniture in his house. I mean, he's got a coffee maker, he's got some other things, he's got a pillow or something, but he doesn't have a lot of furniture. And Chris actually says this, when are you going to get some furniture? And so that's something that isn't really played up as much in the film, but I think it's significant, especially when you remember that whole thing with Vincent, and when he catches Justine, basically having the assumption is she's slept with another man, and Xander Berkeley, right? And then he says he's got the thing, you can stay in her husband's postmodern blah 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 house, but you don't get to watch my television set. And he does that thing, that wonderful Al Pacino thing with his television set, and it sort of has a payoff a little bit later when Al Pacino kicks the TV out of the car as he's getting ready to go to the hotel, and he goes to the hotel, and of course he finds Natalie Portman there, but that's another story. But the point with that is that there is an interesting, subtle mirroring there. De Niro is without furniture, and he is not known for having any objects, whereas Vincent, it's a joke, I know, but it's like he's tying his anger or his almost identity, if you will, in that moment to the fact that he has this object in the house, my television set, which he ends up kicking out of the car anyway. But the point is that Neil doesn't have any furniture, whereas Vincent has a piece of furniture or TV. And so there's a little subtle mirroring of negative space or empty space on the one hand versus a positive or the occupying of a certain spatial expression on the other. And so where there is nothing here, there is something here. Where there's nothing here, there's something here. And so I think this mirroring is quite effective. And I think also this explains why the ending of the film is as powerful as it is. When I first saw the ending of the film with the final shootout at the sort of the outskirts of I think it's LAX, and I thought it was a rather abrupt ending, especially because of all the almost operatic epicness that came, and it ended in this very almost cliche feeling shootout. The cop chasing after the bad guy, which is in essence what it was, and going through the shadows and these cargo units or whatever they were, and going to the outskirts, and finally Neil doing the thing where he sees how the lights turn on. And so that gives him the idea of when the lights turn on, that will give Vincent's position away, and he will be able to essentially shoot and kill him. Well, it backfires, of course, because Vincent was too fast, and he saw the shadow. And that's what made him instinctually turn the gun and fire. And essentially, his arm moves faster than his head, which is very interesting. So he's just instinctual. It's like his body knows how to act much faster than his mind does, which is an amazing moment for Pacino's acting performance, I must say. But I find, at first I thought that was a kind of overly cliched way to end what was otherwise a brilliant film. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this is, in fact, a very fitting way to end the film, especially when I tried to think of the film in this idea of positive energies and negative energies, whereas there's something here, there is nothing, where something is black here, it is white here. Well, this is perfect, right? Because this is a kind of a perfect expression of that way of looking at the film, right? Because what does Al Pacino, the Vincent character, see? He is bathed in light, and he is with form. He has form, and he acts at that particular moment. And what about Neil at that particular moment? He has the light shining behind him, and so that darkens his image to the point of it being not just a silhouette or a blackened form or formless, but also Vincent reacts not to Neil, but to Neil's shadow. So the act of the shadow as it goes along the ground there with the light flashing down is almost a perfect metaphor for this idea of positive energy and empty space. Something that is occupying the physical space and something that is not occupying the physical space, negative energy. Vincent being that positive occupying of space energy or expression of form on the one hand, and then Neil being nothing. He is a void. He is a shadow. And that is a perfect way to end the film, I think. And so the more I thought about it, the more I realized that, for me anyway, I thought the ending was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, because it's a perfect visualization of the positiveness of the form, the physical way that Vincent as a character, and the metaphor of him occupying space as a positive force, and then Neil as a negative force, because he is formless. He is merely a shadow. He is nothing. And it is by this point that that is how Vincent catches his prey. So I found that ending to be quite brilliant, and it really fits into looking at the characters not just being parallels to each other, not just being opposites against each other, but also really when one character represents form, another character represents formlessness. When one character represents light, another character represents shadow. And when those moments occur within the same climactic moment of the film, I think you've got a perfect ending. So I thought that was a really, I think that's really, really clever in how the characters are shown and how they are interacting with each other and how they are seen to be relating to each other, but also how they are diverging from and away from each other. And I like this idea of positive and negative. Vincent being representing the positive, and then Neil representing the negative. And it's perfect too when you place that against the very tried and true storyline, narrative genre, if you will, of cops and robbers. Right? You have cops and robbers. It's elemental. It's a fundamental way. It's a fundamental storyline. Cops and robbers, good guys and bad guys. And so, if you have the good guys occupying the positive space or the positive energy, then we have to have the bad guys, just by virtue of them being on the opposite side, the polar opposite. They must occupy the negative space or the negative energy. And I thought that was perfect, absolutely perfect encapsulation, and a really brilliant poetic way to end. And then. Yeah, so I think I've been talking too long, so let me just now go to the live chat, and then we will go from there. So let's see. Malika Lakri is here, so greetings from Paris. Daisuke, excuse me, I'm late. Not at all. I hope you're well. Let's see. It's nice to see you. Yes. Salut. Comment ça va? Ça va bien. And let's see. Wolfgrat says, in fact, I thought the initial crew bonded pretty well. I mean, I loathed them, but they were a pretty tight group. Yes, they were. Perhaps a little bit too tight, as I was trying to express in terms of the rather ill-timed dinner event that they had. What does Vincent say? It's like a convention, but it's good. Let's see, Cooper Glover, 1972. I like the minimalistic kind of score in the film, maybe sort of like Philip Glass. Yeah, L.A. Goldenthal, right? So I don't think it maybe not Philip Glass per se, but it does have a nice ambient sound feel to it. That's for sure. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, that's a really good point. And Jared says, seeing Pacino and De Niro on screen for the first time was awesome. It's surprising. They've only been in 4 films together and even have shared some screen time in 3 of them. Yes, that's a very good point, my friend. That was a really big deal when this was released in '95. A really, really big deal. Cooper Glover, 1972. As usually as any heist film, no matter how well you plan your heist, something will definitely go wrong. Alan Negrello says, amazing cinematography in this films. The views of LA during the helicopter flight are electric. Yes. Is it there's the one, I think there are a lot of open or above the air shots of Los Angeles at night. What did I say earlier? What does Neil says? He says rather randomly, in Fiji there is this iridescent algae. I love that. I love how he meant. Gosh, this is such a great thing about Neil McCauley as a character and the universe of Heat. Only Neil McCauley would decide to use this whole thing about iridescent algae in Fiji as a way to try to kind of romance Edie. And it works kind of, because it's kind of a really poignant moment, but that's such a Neil McCauley moment. Oh gosh, if I tried that, if I were younger and I was trying to meet a woman and and I was attracted to her, I think the last thing I would do is try to talk to her about iridescent algae. But I guess I'm not Robert De Niro, and I'm not as suave as he is. So, gosh, that's such a great line. Gosh, but what we were saying, yes. So the helicopter, right? So there are some wonderful shots of Los Angeles at night, but that helicopter scene that I think you're referring to, that's the one where we have they've spotted Neil, Because up to now, he's been pretty hard to pin down. He's always lost the tails, but they spotted him, and so now Vincent is going to ride a helicopter to a meeting point where he's going to get a car, and he's going into the car, and he's going to drive down to this rock score, and he's just driving almost to the point of being reckless in how much speed he's driving at, and then he's trying to drive, and that's before the famous diner scene. So I think, yeah, that's a wonderful helicopter shot there. Wonderful way that this film is shot. I I I also loved, if you remember, when Waingro meets Van Zandt. And because Van Zandt's been in his office, he's been living in his office day and night because of this threat. I'm talking to an empty telephone, and he's just been so scared to death, really, of Neil and what's going to happen to him. So he's called in any help that he can get, and Waingro's come in. And when Waingro and Van Zandt are talking, there's a little bit where the top of the screen, when it cuts to Waingro, there's a little bit of almost faded black. It's not really the fullness of the screen you're getting. The top of the screen is a little bit faded to black, and I always found that to be an interesting little visual trick or cue to suggest that maybe whenever we have that Waingro is here and there's something not right. Whenever Waingro appears in this universe, something is not right, and indeed it isn't right, because he really, his existence is really the snowball effect that really is it brings down the whole house of cards, does it not? But yeah, that helicopter shot is really amazing. It's a really good point, Alan. Really, Eric Pieper, our dear friend, is here. Let's see. It's nice to see you, Eric. Neo Batia says, hello, Daisuke. I saw Heat for the first time on Thursday so I could participate in the live stream. I loved the shootout after the heist and the conversations between the characters. It adds depth. Yes. Let's see. Bill R says, it is addressed later because it is suggested that he tortured and kills Trejo's wife. Kubrick Lover 1972 says, was this film shot on video or film? I think Mann had shot some of his films on video. I think he at least shot Collateral on video. Total Loser film. Jared Wignall says it's shot on film. And then Total Loser says, yeah, but his stuff from 2000s onwards are mostly digital. But you're right, it does have a kind of digital feel to it. But yes, my understanding too that this was on film. Let's see, just scrolling down here. Alan says Waingro is the true villain of the film, while the crew are criminals and ready to do violence within the context of the job. Waingro is a true monster. Yeah, it's interesting how Waingro is depicted here. At first, we almost feel bad for Waingro, almost, because that's another thing about this film. And thank you, Alan, for reminding me about this. I wanted to mention this, which was that a lot of this film also is about, at least I think, can be said to be about miscommunications. And, I mentioned miscommunications in the context of Justine and Vincent in the early scenes of the film. I'll make coffee, I don't have time, and all that stuff, and Lauren. And so there's this trail of miscommunication in that part of the film. There are also some moments of miscommunication here which lead to consequences that are adverse to the main characters at hand. And let me give you an example. And this is also another example, if I could, of paralleling or not mirroring, but paralleling, because the action is the same for both characters. So here's an example. So if you remember at the beginning, when Waingro first meets the crew, he gets into the truck driven by Michael, and Michael's driving, and Michael doesn't really want to talk, and Waingro's just going on and on and on. And you've been really close, yeah, real close, real tight, etc. And then Michael's just looking forward to driving. He says, stop talking, Slick. And that really really bothers Waingro. We see him visibly bothered, and he turns and stuff, and then he looks back. And when he looks back, that's the moment when the truck stops and Michael turns. And so it's an interesting moment where they never look straight in the eye, kind of. Even I think when Michael shakes his hand, he doesn't even look at him. He's like, yeah, whatever, And so when he says, stop talking, Slick, Waingro looks, and then he looks back, and when he looks back, that's when Michael looks at him. So there's a kind of an interesting way in which their head movements almost are suggestive of the fact that there's a miscommunication. It's almost like I'd love to think that had there been a kind of, I don't know, more welcoming attitude that Michael gave to Waingro at that moment, I'd like to think that maybe Waingro would not have done what it was that he did. He was very obviously agitated by this very cold reception that he got from Michael. So there's almost a sense of, had Michael seen, had they made eye contact, maybe they could have remedied whatever tiff that came up between them. I don't know. So that's a little bit of what I might classify as being a kind of miscommunication. Maybe if they had better communicated, or Michael had better communicated, then maybe the situation would not have escalated the way it did to create the film's narrative. I know. But then again, we understand later in the film that Waingro is indeed a very, very dangerous man. He's a very dangerous man. He's a killer. And he's not just a killer, he is a killer of we understand, young women. And he's also a serial killer based on the fact that we understand that the victim, the young woman that he killed, was not his first victim in this kind of situation. And so we understand that later. He is a very dangerous and dark character. And so whatever kind of sympathy we might have had for Waingro at the start of the film, of course it dissipates by the middle and by the end, of course. So he is the true villain. But I still would like to think that even in this early stage, when we as viewers, if we're looking at this film for the first time and seeing the possibility of Waingro, let me put it that way, we might look at this moment of Michael's and think maybe Michael should have been a little bit more welcoming, but maybe this was a kind of miscommunication cue on his part, which unfortunately led to things turning out the way they did. There's another moment that's very similar with Vincent. This time, this was again when they're surveilling one of the earlier the non-bank score that they're trying to break in at night, and Vincent and his crew are hiding in one of the empty cargo trucks, and we have one of the cops, I think it's SWAT team, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's LAPD, and they've got their guns strapped. And one of the guys, he's drinking water, he's got glasses, and he's saying, because he's on the radio with his captain, who's in another position, and they're saying, what should we do? And then Vincent says, do nothing, we're going to wait, and stay off the radio. That's what he says. I'm paraphrasing, and it kind of ruffles this officer the wrong way, and so that's another moment where Vincent kind of talked down to the guy. Of course, it's very understandable because he's focusing in on the moment. He's focusing in because this is a moment where he thinks that if all goes to plan, this is where he can catch the big fish, right? So of course he's focused in on this. Who cares about this other guy asking all these questions? Stay off the radio, stay quiet. Of course, that's what Vincent would be thinking. But it's the way that he communicated this that you can tell that this officer was a little bit maybe annoyed, or a little bit, what's going on here? I'm not being appreciated almost. And maybe we can say that it was that little bit of annoyance, that ripple of annoyance that was caused by Vincent's manner in communicating this thing about don't be on the radio, that then caused that officer to do what he did and sit down and make the little noise with the gun in the back there. And so that's another thing too, which is like that little miscommunication by Vincent caused a ripple effect that created an adverse situation. Namely, his plans to catch Neil and his crew at that particular moment just really just collapsed spectacularly. The same thing with Michael and Waingro in that early scene. It's that little miscommunication that leads Waingro, it could be said, to do the things that he does in a very dastardly way that is very adverse to Neil and his interests. And so those little bits of miscommunication cause ripples. And so I really find this to be another interesting example of how there is a mirroring effect going on throughout the film, these being examples. But but Alan, I agree with you. Waingro is the true villain. Van Zandt is also a real nasty piece of work. He's trying to make money, and even as he's making money, he still is ruthless, and he wants to essentially kill the people who stole from him. So I guess one can understand one's anger against people who stole from you, of course, but there is a certain bit of nastiness to his character, especially I think because we're also meant to sympathize with Neil and his crew to a certain degree. But that's actually, before I get to the live chat, let me also say this because I'm going to forget it elsewhere. But that's another thing that's really interesting about this film too, which is that on the one hand, it is very easy to sympathize with Neil and that part of the film, this side of the film, because it's Robert De Niro and it's Val Kilmer and Tom Sizemore and these characters that are very tough, very machismo, but we see them in very sensitive, intimate situations, and they become very, very almost likable, very, very likable. I think sometimes we are really actually rooting for De Niro to be successful in his getaway, which is really a fascinating thing. But we also see them, of course, we see them in their element, but they are also seen doing very terrible stuff. At the very start, we see them doing a really terrible crime with this van and crashing into it and doing all this thing at the very start of the film. This is a pretty bold move because we see them and their element, and we see them essentially be responsible essentially for the deaths of these otherwise innocent men. We see them donning these very sinister, like I guess hockey masks or something. So it adds a real element of danger and menace. They're monsters. They are monsters in this moment. And then later on, of course, we get to know them, and they all become very likable, of course. And then the shootout. The shootout is so important for many reasons. Of course, it's the centerpiece of the film. In many ways, it's the climax of the film. It's the most thrilling, shocking, exciting moment of the film. That the entire bank heist, of course, is incredible, absolutely incredible. And we see them, and that's such an interesting thing about the film, which is that the moment that they walk into the bank, we're kind of rooting for them, which is weird, such a weird thing. We're kind of rooting for them, but there is a turn that suddenly happens because we're rooting for them up to the point, at least for me anyway, up to the point where we first see Val Kilmer's character essentially turn around and beat the poor security guard the way he does, with the loud sound and everything. And then Michael does the same thing. And that's an interesting thing too. Neil doesn't do that, if you notice. Neil just says, get down with that security guard that he's got his eye on. So he doesn't beat him like the other two did. But when we see that, it's very shocking because maybe up to now we might have been almost rooting for these bad guys to get away, but now we're seeing them in their element. It's really, really terrible what they're doing to these poor people who aren't, they're just innocent bystanders or victims. And one of the moments that I thought was so shocking is when Neil's got the security guard that he's been eyeing, and he says, and he has the security guard turn around and he ties him up with the plastic thing. I forget exactly what the name of it, but the plastic, it's not handcuffs, but it's the plastic little thing where you turn it and it locks into place. And then the thing that he does, which is so cruel, I thought, he kicks him down when he's got his hands bound behind his back. And then the guy falls on his belly on the floor. I thought that was such a cruel moment. And then he does the thing where Neil goes on the top and says, your money's insured. You're not going to lose your dime. Think of your families. Don't be a hero. And he's got that weird, a sympathetic moment where he says, anyone's got heart trouble, heart condition, go against the floor, go against the wall. That's fine. That's a weird kind of humanizing moment. But then he neutralizes it almost immediately afterwards when he says, where's the key? Where's the key? He goes to the bank manager. Where's the key? I don't know. And he says, boom, and he knocks him flat, and he's just this terrible bloodied mess. And then he humanizes the moment again. He says, sit there, don't move, let it bleed. Which is weird. It's kind of a shifting back and forth between humanizing Neil and then neutralizing that humanizing element and then humanizing him again. And then that is neutralized almost immediately by the whole shootout, because we see all the horror that they are essentially causing in terms of all this stuff. It's not just the fact that they're shooting against cops, which is a terrible thing in and of itself. They are shooting where there are these innocent bystanders. And in some instances, we see kids running around the plaza and that sort of thing, which is terrible stuff. And everyone is shocked and scared, as they would be, as they should be. And so they kind of become, at that moment, monsters. And I think this is exemplified so so visually perfectly by how the Michael Sciarito character, Tom Sizemore's character, turns out in this particular moment. Because we see him, essentially, he runs across the fountain, he falls into the water, he gets up, he sees a child standing there in fright, he picks the child up, and almost, we're not quite sure why he does this, but the assumption is that he's doing it almost like a human shield, almost. And if that's the case, that is utterly monstrous. Really, it is utterly monstrous. So he falls down. He's pathetic. He falls down in the water. He's just this sad, sad thing. But he becomes monstrous when he picks up the child, which is why his death is just such a. It's such it's his character becomes such a beast, and I don't feel sympathy when his character ends the way it does, especially the way it ends. And so there's a certain heroic sense that Al Pacino's character brings to that particular moment, I think. But my point is that it's so fascinating how the film really depicts these characters as almost anti-heroes, but then also turning them into monsters and then turning them back into anti-heroes and monsters again. And it goes back to the whole fundamental, elemental dynamic of the story, namely this is cops and robbers, but these are good guys. This is a story of good guys and bad guys, and no matter how cool they might be depicted, and they are depicted in really, really cool ways, of course, these are still bad guys. And I think I really appreciate how the film still tries to make us remind us of that. And the Shootout is certainly no exception to that. I think the Shootout is exciting, it's thrilling, it's horrifying, but it is horrifying, and I'll underscore that. It is horrifying because it does remind us that these are bad guys, and indeed almost to the point of being utterly monstrous. Utterly monstrous. We think that Waingro is a monster and a villain, and he is, of course, he is. But remember that these guys in the shootout, they are killing people in the shootout, and it's a terrible thing. I mean, they kill one of the Bosco, in a very violent way, and they kill other police officers. We don't really see the end results of them. We don't hold on them, anyone who is killed, but we do see the aftermath, or we can sense that many people were injured, if not they lost their lives. And so, and then we are then meant to sympathize with the plight of Neil, because he is under threat. We are meant to sympathize with Chris because he loses his wife. We are kind of, I suppose, meant to sympathize with Trejo because of what happened, what we understand happened with him at the hands of Waingro and his crew, etc., like that. So it does go back and forth in terms of where our sympathies lie. But I do want to emphasize that I think also that these really thrilling moments and action heist moments, especially at the beginning and in the middle or 2/3 into the film, this shootout, do remind us that these are villains and they are monsters. There might be other bigger, greater monsters out there in this particular universe, but they are still bad guys. And I think the film is very clear about that, especially how the film ends, of course. The good guy offs the bad guy. And so even though they might be friends, even though there's a mutual respect, they hold hands as he dies, of course. It's very poetic, but still it is a good guy, bad guy movie. So I just wanted to keep that in mind there. So sorry about this. Sorry for going off like this, but let's see. Let's see. Neo continues, I also loved how it explored the relationship between the cop and the criminal and how their lives are very similar, how they can't handle a romantic relationship. Yeah, that's interesting. Can't handle. I think that's a really interesting way of putting it. I would say that for Vincent Hanna, his relationship is such that it's not sustainable in the current situation that it is, because he is away, and Justine is someone who needs, and I don't mean to say this in a way that is demeaning of her character. I think she understandably needs kind of a certain degree of attention, and she feels like she's not getting it from this particular relationship because he is focused on his job almost 24/7. Which is really interesting. There's an interesting, almost poetic, what's the phrase? Irony in that relationship, and it's an interesting detail, and I always forget it, but whenever I see it, I'm reminded of it, which is at the end of the film, with the final scene between the two of them, Justine and Vincent, is when they're in the hospital and they've just heard the news that Lauren's going to make it, and her condition has become stabilized. Thank goodness, of course, thank goodness. That is such a sad, shocking, terrible moment in the film. Oh my goodness, I think about that now, and it bothers me so much. So thank goodness that character was able to pull through. But the scene I was trying to refer to is the scene after that, or immediately after, when the two of them are alone in the hospital. And it's an interesting moment because, if you recall, this is the moment where Vincent knows, or he thinks, that Neil has gone away, he's escaped, and so he's basically he's accepted that he's lost. And so that's when he goes back to the hotel. That's when he finds the young girl in the bathtub. That's when he rushes to the hospital in the nick of time to save her, after he's quick on his feet to act, to make sure that he does the thing with her arms and legs and all that stuff. And he's very clear in his directions, and in terms of what he thinks happened to her, and very clear in his directions. And I loved how the nurse says, calm down. And he says, I am calm. And then he proceeds to give her all these instructions in terms of medical assistance, immediate emergency medical assistance. I love that reversal, and we see Vincent in his element, and it's so wonderful. But not wonderful in the situation, it's a terrible situation, but wonderful in the sense that we see Vincent in his element, which is exactly what Justine needed to see. I think up to that point, I don't think Justine ever saw that side of Vincent before, but we see him in action like this, trying to save this little girl, but we also see her seeing him in action, which I think is also very significant, which leads, I think, to her afterwards asking, is there any hope for us? And then he says, I don't know, I don't think so. It's like what you said, all I am is what I'm going after. And so in that line, or in those lines, I think they both acknowledge that the relationship is over. I mean, their intimate relationship is over. I think afterwards they were probably, I can assume, maybe their friendship or something will last after these events of these films. At least I'd like to think so. But in terms of their marriage, I think it's over. I think so anyway. I mean, we never get any full confirmation of that, obviously, because the film ends the way it does. But I think it's over. We can assume that it is. But what is so interesting about this moment, if you recall, is that this is when his beeper goes off, remember? And the beeper went off because of this whole thing that happened in the hotel. And the fire alarm and all that, and this is essentially where Neil is making his final attack on the hotel, right? He's supposed to go to his out, but at LAX, that Nate, the fence, all set up. But Nate said, you asked, so I got to tell you, he's in what is it, the Marquis Hotel? I hope I got that right. But so Neil is basically going in and going to, in essence, assassinate Waingro. But and that's the whole thing that calls Vincent to action with his beeper. And what does Vincent do? This is so interesting. Does he go and say, I gotta go? He doesn't do that. He says, oh, no, I'm gonna stay. He says that, I'm gonna stay. But it's Justine who says, no, you gotta go. And actually, Justine kind of encourages him to go, and then that leads him to go off down the stairs in a sort of really lovely, quiet, cinematic, poetic flourish, and then he goes off and does the final climatic battle at the hotel and LAX outskirts and stuff. But that's an interesting moment, right? Because he wanted to stay, but it was Justine who said, no, he encouraged him, you should go. This is who you are. You should do this, you should go. So I found that to be such a beautifully poignant role reversal, because up to now, she has wanted him to stay, and he has always been reluctant to stay. Well, now the roles have changed. She is now encouraging him to do his duty, to fulfill what he is as a man, as a human being, where he insistent that he stay because of this really terrible situation. Had he stayed, of course, that would have meant that probably Neil and Edie would have probably gotten away. And so Justine, in many respects, was, you can think about it, like Justine was kind of the downfall of Neil and the film. So, but I love that role reversal. I think that's such a poignant moment. It's like where both of the characters adopt the other's prior position in a gesture that means that they both finally recognize the other side's viewpoint, to the point that they adopt the other side's viewpoint. And I think that's such a really powerful moment. You know, their marriage might end, but that is kind of a really powerful thing. This idea of relationships and the idea of understanding the position of the other. That is something that is not so easy. I mean, let's think about it in real life. You know, in real life, when we think about our own relationships and we think about sometimes we get into fights or arguments with people that we love, sometimes it's very difficult in those moments to really fully appreciate the position of the other person, to the point that even after we might have the fight might have been over and we have maybe resolved our differences, still we might not necessarily understand the position of the other. Well, here there is such a perfect role reversal that it's such a beautiful moment that it's almost like at the point where they understand that their marriage is over, this is where they are most linked and they're most together. And they're together, of course, they're on the same page because their concern is the well-being of this young girl. And once that's been confirmed, then they're talking directly and earnestly and honestly with each other about the relationship. It's probably the only point. Well, we see them, of course, in an act of physical lovemaking at the beginning, which is, of course, a kind of physical way of connecting with another human being, of course. So that's one way that they connected. But then all the way through the film, we can say that they were never really connecting. They never connected in terms of relationships, in terms of their discussions or conversations, except the end. So they were kind of in a physical connection at the beginning and a kind of emotional connection at the end. And all the way in between, it was always a little bit off. They were never on the same page. So there's a kind of nice bookend quality to their relationship. And it's bookended, of course, by the ending here, by that there's a complete role reversal. And that role reversal is almost an expression or a metaphor for the fact that they have at last understood the position of the other side, which I think is very rare, but is also a kind of optimistic viewpoint of the human condition, I think. As I was trying to suggest earlier, it's not always easy to sympathize or empathize. What's the word? I think it's empathize or understand the position of the other. Where here those characters have done that, I think, perfectly. It is a cinematic expression, of course. It's not real life. I get that. But it is still a very poignant way to have their characters, and their characters are ending in the most emotionally connected way that they've ever been throughout the entirety of the film. And there's something very ironically moving about that. But yes, so it is a kind of exploration of how they can't handle relationships, but in an ironic way, they handle relationships best when they know that they don't have one. Let's talk then about Neil and Edie. I think there's a similar thing that's going on. Well, not similar actually, because it's like Neil's. It could almost be said that Neil's. Well, actually, let me take that back. I was going to say that Neil's relationship with Edie was almost like his kind of downfall, but that's actually not the case, right? Because Neil and Edie were kind of in a really comfortable place in their relationship. Of course, it had its real rocky patch around the 2/3 mark, because Edie realized who this guy was, and he was a criminal, and he did this terrible thing, and so she was really about to leave, and it was only through his real force of will and his almost seductive powers of persuade, or his persuasive powers of persuasion, seductive powers of persuasion, that he was able to essentially convince her to essentially be with him. I mean, you can go on your own and make the choice on your own to come with me, and that's what he says. That really lovely scene with the two of them, and she's got her back to him, and she's behind her, and his body's kind of blocked by her body, who's in the foreground. What a beautiful scene, and we see her facial expression slowly change as he is talking, and he says, I know that I can't go on. It's not worth going on without you. And it's that moment that her face changes. What a great acting moment that is. But so at that moment, and their out has been secured. Nate has secured another out with this whole thing about the plane that will stop by, and it's a very kind of complicated thing, but it will pick them up. They've got passports and everything. So Nate, the fence, has been as reliable as ever, and so they're off. They're ready to go. And so it's not as though Edie's relationship in any way hindered Neil's Neil's need or Neil's performance as a criminal, I would say. There might be some question as to the reason exactly why he decided to go through with the Kelso bank plan to begin with. There's this whole thing about him wanting to go away. Were these plans of him wanting to go away to New Zealand, were they already settled before he met Edie, or were they in the air only after he met Edie? That's something that's not clear to me. I can probably assume, though, that maybe it was by meeting Edie that maybe really convinced him to accelerate his plans to sort of give up the life and escape to New Zealand. And so you see the moment where he says, when they're trying to make the final decision, all four of them, out in the outskirts, by these power lines or something, and he's trying to ask everyone if they really want to go through the Kelso bank heist. I say Kelso because that's the name of the guy, right? Kelso, who basically masterminded the entire bank heist to begin with. And he says, what's the estimate? 12.2 million. And then Neil says, "You're on." So that's Kelso. So I refer to it as the Kelso bank heist. But there's that scene where the four of them are trying to decide whether to actually go through the Kelso bank heist, and he's asking them one at a time, first Chris and then Michael. And then when he's talking to Michael, if you remember, Michael is trying to convince him that it's probably a good idea to really cut loose of this. And he says, he also mentions that after this is over, I'm gonna get out of the life myself. And you see Chris's reaction at this moment. He's like, Chris is registering surprise. It's almost as though he didn't know about this until he just heard this little mentioning of this situation by Neil. And so it's still an ambiguous thing. So we're not quite sure if Neil was really planning to leave the life all along, or maybe it was because he met Edie. That's what convinced him to leave the life. But in any event, I love that, how it's a little bit ambiguous like that. But my point is that if it's the fact that he wanted to leave the life because he met Edie, and if it's because of that final impetus that made him want to do the bank heist or not do the bank heist, it becomes an interesting thing. In other words, can we interpret the situation such that it was his relationship with Edie that convinced Neil to go along with the bank heist in the first place? What was the actual motivation of Neil to begin with? Was he more concerned about Chris? He knows that Chris is in a pretty difficult financial situation, so maybe we understand that there's almost like maybe a brother to brother, maybe fatherly relationship almost, or an older brother relationship almost that Neil has with Chris. Maybe he realizes that, right, the bank is worth the risk. I need it, brother. That's what Chris says. And so maybe because of that, he's convinced that he should go along. Neil could have walked away. He could have walked away. He said he had enough saved up. He could have walked away, but maybe he really needed this final score in terms of his own financial situation. Who knows? Who knows? My point is that we can interpret the situation any which way, but I think one way we can interpret it, which I think is a very reasonable way, is that even with this relationship that he had with Edie, he still... his relationship with Edie wasn't in any way detrimental to his criminal way of life. And we also see that fulfilled by the very end, because we understand that he and Edie could have gotten away had he not turned the car and gone off the ramp and made his final attack on Wango. He could have left it be, and he said, you're home free. That's what Nate says, you're home free. And so that was it, but he made his final decision. So it wasn't Edie that convinced him to make the stop to Wango. It was his own thirst for vengeance, or whatever it was that he needed to settle. It was the last score that he needed to settle. So it was really his decision which ultimately affected his fate, and his fate with Edie and his relationship and his own life, because he loses his life at the hands of Vincent. So it wasn't Edie's relationship that affected him like that. So that makes that final twist at the end of their relationship, meaning he walks away from her. he never tells her anything. He never says goodbye. He just looks at her, looks in the distance, and walks away, runs away. We understand why, of course, because he sees Vincent in the distance there. She doesn't understand the context, though, which makes it even more sad, more tragic. And of course, the music helps to illustrate how sad and tragic this is. But what was I saying? What was I saying? So yes. So it was like almost Vincent's relationship with Justine was almost like it couldn't. They couldn't. They weren't. How should I put it? Mutually. They couldn't mutually coexist. One one had to exist over the other. Whereas with Edie's relationship with Neil, it was almost like they could both coexist at the same time. It was an interesting sort of, that's another sort of mirroring that I think is going on. But ultimately, the mirroring turns into parallelism, like we've also seen elsewhere in the film, in that they both end. They both end in a very interesting way. But the ending is also not parallelism, but is also mirroring in that they are opposites, right? Because as I was suggesting with Vincent and Justine, they end in a way that is most emotionally connected. They understand each other for the first time, which is really beautiful. With Neil and Edie, they end in a way that is so ambiguous. They don't even say goodbye. And the implication is that she will never know the reason why he did what he did, why he ran away the way that he did. And so that is the ultimate form of non-communication, of lack of connectedness, which is the total opposite of how Vincent and Justine's relationship ends. And I love that sort of cinematic mirroring. It's so metaphorically perfect for the way in which this film is structured. But anyway, let's see. So, Bill R says, ferocious, Arna. Yes, that's a line that's not in the director's definitive edition. So you have to find an earlier release of that. But I love that line. I don't know why. I mentioned it at the start of the live stream. I don't know why that was cut out, but they didn't fix the way that one of the surveillance guys at the hotel where Waingro is staying, why didn't they change the way he pronounces his name? He says Wango. He should have, I don't know. Anyway, that's a little thing. I'm sorry. Let's see. Alan, yes, so Alan, because she's, yeah, okay. I'm not going to repeat it, but yeah, I know exactly the line that we're referring to. Yeah, okay. Jared says, Pacino ad-libbed some of his stuff and was yelling to get shocking reactions out of people. Man likes it and thought it fit the character so well. Twisted Razor says, Pacino is one of my favorite parts of the movie. His line delivery and outbursts made me laugh and scared me a little. Let's see here, just skipping down here. Let's see. Oh, sorry. Okay, I just lost my position here in the live chat. I always do this. I apologize greatly. Let's see. Let me just try to find my space here. All right, here. Okay, sorry about this. Just give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. Let's see. Neo Batia says, and when Vincent holds Neil's hand while he's dying, that you're talking about the very end of the film, of course, that shot as well as the piece by Moby. Yes, it's so iconic. It's God moving over the face of the waters, right? And it's actually interesting. You know, that's if you get the soundtrack. I don't know if you were like me, but when this film first came out, I immediately had to buy the CD soundtrack, and I did. But that version of the song, which is a great way to end the film, of course. It's kind of iconically linked with the film. It was in all the trailers and all that. It's great. God moving over the face of the waters. But the version that's used on the soundtrack is different than the version that was used for the final overlay of the end of the film. there's a little bit of a burst of musical energy that comes as the film goes to black, and it says a Michael Mann film or something. So let's see. So great ending though. Okay, so Cineflect. Oh, our dear friend Cineflect. I love Cineflect. I love Cineflect. I love his channel. Oh, it's nice to see you, my dear friend. I hope you're well. Gino De Gregorio. It's nice to see you, my friend. Thank you very much. Neo says both Vincent and Neil love the journey more than they do the destination. Oh, I love how you said this. Okay, Vincent doesn't feel victorious. He feels regret for killing someone he had a lot in common with, someone he admired. Yes, that's what Nate says, according to the guy that he has inside the police department there. He says, says that, what he says, my vice sergeant says that Hannah likes you. That's great. But I love the way that you mentioned it, Neil, which is you said both Vincent and Neil love the journey more than they do the destination. That really reminds me also of the coffee scene. And I know you're talking about the ending, but I think your comment speaks also to the very famous diner scene. And it was a moment that I always thought, up to recently, I always thought it was a little bit of a contradiction. And it was a contradiction with respect to Neil's character. If you recall, there's the moment when the two of them bond in the diner scene. And they bond when they say, let's see, what is it? The music starts to come in, the lovely slow piano music starts to come in. And when Neil's talking about eating, and he says, what is his line? He says, I have a woman. And he says, I tell her I'm a salesman. And then he says, you're going to walk out or just like that? And he says, that's the discipline. And he says, that's pretty vacant. And then Neil says, it is what it is. It's either that, we have to do something else. And then Vincent says, I don't know how to do anything else. And then Neil says, neither do I. And then Vincent says, I don't much want to either. And then Neil says, neither do I. And then they smile, sort of mutual respect for each other. And so it's that whole thing of, I don't know how to do anything else. Neither do I. I don't want to do anything else either. Neither do I. So that's, at the one time, that's an acknowledgement of what they're doing. They really enjoy what they're doing. And I understand that it's probably also the actors, De Niro and Pacino, talking to each other as much as it is Vincent and Neil. I understand that, but let's stick with the world of the film for a moment, and let's imagine that this is Vincent and Neil talking. They say, they're essentially both acknowledging that they like what they do, but then a few moments later, they're talking about their dreams, and Vincent's talking about his dream about all the victims around the table. And then Neil's talking about drowning, and he has to wake up or he'll die in his sleep. And it's about not having enough time to do what it is he wants to do. And then Vincent asks him, are you doing it now? And he says, no, not yet. So then in the same scene, he says, I like doing what I do. But then a moment later, he says, I'm not doing what it is I want to do yet, which explains the dream. So there is, I think, an inherent contradiction in that particular scene, specifically in how the Neil character is being portrayed. I always found that to be very peculiar, to be perfectly honest. I always thought that to be really odd. And why is there this contradiction? It never made sense to me, except that I suppose we can say that there is something to be said about the idea of destination and journeys. It's more about the journey and less about the destination. And I think Neo, the way you put it, reminded me of that. It's almost like it's like that contradiction is almost perfectly expressed, or the contradiction can be perfectly explained by the fact that Neil likes the journey, but he's seeking a destination that is not what it is now. So that, I think that's an interesting, a really reasonable kind of human contradiction that is in a lot of us. We find that we like what it is we do, but we are always seeking something else. We are seeking a goal. And I think that's what's going on here. He, in a way, this is his life, and he not likes what he does, but this is what he does. This is who he is. But he is trying to reach some kind of goal whether it's New Zealand, whether it's a life with Edie, happiness, I'm not sure exactly, but he's reaching a goal and he's not doing what it is he's wanting to do yet. And what I like about this as well is that it is a perfect encapsulation of the inherent contradiction of Neil's character itself, right? Because on the one hand, we see him cold and calculating and without connections to with everyone, no furniture. He's ready to basically live the philosophy of if you walking away in 30 seconds flat, if you spot the heat around the corner, that philosophy, it's just a very cold view of humanity. In other words, you cannot leave, you cannot make any connections in this life. That is on the one hand of Neil's character. And then on the other hand, we actually see him in this film making a very fundamental connection with another human being. And so there is already inherent in Neil himself from the very beginning a contradiction. And when I think about that also, I think that, yes, the fact that he's expressing a contradiction in this diner scene within the space of not even a minute, I think that is not in any way a detriment to the film, but in fact it is a natural expression of the inherent contradiction in Neil's character. But anyway, thank you so much, Neil, for reminding me of that. I was meaning to say that, but I was probably going to forget unless I read your comments. So bravo, Neil. Thank you so much. I owe you. Let's see. Maximus Manstill is here. Hello. This movie is a personal favorite of mine. So glad you're covering it. Well, thank you very much, my friend. I'm glad to see you. Let's see. Jared says the gun use in the film was really incredible. Not just the famous shootout was great, but the gun use was just great all around. Seeing them training on the special features is a great watch. Yes, there's an interesting thing too. The police officers, they have their. I'm not good with my firearms, but one detail which I thought was very interesting and also very significant, of course, the bad guys, the criminals, and the shootout, their weapons are automatic, which means I think they fire all these rounds at once, whereas the police officers' rounds, Hannah's, for example, it gives off one round at a time. So I don't know if that's a reflection of the LAPD's use of firearms versus the criminal use of firearms. I'm not sure. I'm not a firearms expert, but you're right about the guns. And also that reminds. Well, actually, I'll get to the one other point I wanted to bring up later, which is about the final confrontation between Neil and Waingro. But yes, Jared, I love your comment here. Let's see. Alan says, so funny that you mentioned your reaction to detritus. That line almost pulled me out of the narrative flow of the movie the first time I saw it. Yes. You sift, what does she say? You sift through the detritus. Yeah, I mean, I can't, right? Is there another film that uses the word detritus? I don't know. Maybe our dear friend Wolfgratz will know that. I'm not sure, but yeah. So maybe that's the thing about this film. There are some bits of dialogue that are not that are very literary. Breeden, I think, when he says there isn't any difficulty that I cannot handle, or something like that. When he's sort of in his drunken stupor and in depression after he realizes that his job is really a kind of terrible job and his boss is really taking money from him. It's sort of like he's a slave, which is a really terrible situation. He's losing his manhood, but he says there is no difficulty that I cannot handle. Which is a very odd way of expressing it. I think it's not how I would express it, but it's there's an interesting kind of nonsensical sense, for lack of a better way of expressing it, in this world of heat, and how the characters speak dialogue and how they talk to each other. I mentioned some great lines which are really almost out of place in a real life setting, but they somehow work in the universe of heat, in Michael Mann's universe here. But that's an example. Detritus is an example. Let's see. Then another, I mentioned it before, but when Justine says at the end, regarding her daughter, why did she do this to herself? How could she do this to herself? And this is where she's, I think, meant to be at her most, emotional. And she says this very eloquently stated line at a point when her emotional anxiety, I think, is at its height. So these are, and I'm not saying that as a criticism, but I think that's just the world and the rhythms of this particular world that we find ourselves in. But which is really great, I think, for purposes of this particular world. Let's see. Jacob is here. Jacob Crawford. Konnichiwa, Daisuke. Love this nocturnal crime epic. So glad you're talking about it. I love the way you describe it. Nocturnal crime epic. That's really interesting. Most of the scenes take place at night, of course, although there are many scenes, many key scenes, of course, that take place in the bright sunshine of day, which is also a very interesting way to put it. The shootout takes place during the day as well, which is, I think, very significant. But a lot of the other significant scenes do take place at night or are under the cover of darkness, that's for sure. So just skipping down here. Oliver is here, best shootout ever. Rui Ferreira here. Val Kilmer was shooting Batman Forever and Heat back to back. One of his worst and best role ever, but guess the Batman paycheck was amazing. Let's see. Oh yes, this was around the time of Batman Forever, right? I know this is. I know I said I wasn't going to mention Batman, any other films, but I must say this. I'm so sorry about this. Please forgive me. But I think one of my favorite lines from Batman Forever is "Holy rusted metal, Batman," and Batman says, "Huh?" And then Robin says, it's the metal. It's all full of holes. Holy." And he says, "Ah, holy rusted metal, Batman." But back to Heat. Sorry about that. So let's see here. And Jared is talking about the shootout. Pete 1972 is here. Hello, my friend. Let's see. I'm just scrolling down here. Alan continues. Love the sound of the echo of the weapons in the canyons of L.A. boulevards. That's an interesting way of putting it. Yes, you also bring up another thing too. This is a very L.A. film. I don't know the city of Los Angeles well enough to recognize all the sites and locations of this film, but I know that those of you who are LA experts or live in LA will probably recognize most, if not all, of the places that were shot. I understand that this was not shot on a set. This was all shot on location and places like that, or in rooms or something like that. But these were really hotels that were being shot at. There was actually locations at the LAX and the shootout and things like that. So that's my understanding here. Let's see. Yes, Jacob Crawford says, I always laugh when I see Henry Rollins as the heavy. What was his name? I love his name too. Gosh, I have it written down here. What was it? Hugh Benny. Gosh, I love that name. Yeah. The CI, Hugh Benny. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Malika says the work of man is really impressive. I watched Collateral for the first time 2 weeks ago, and I think that with Heat, it's his best films. Let's see. Let's see here. Let's see. Bill R. and Wolfkratz are discussing the scene, the shootout scene. Kevin Kelly's here. Thank you very much. This is perfectly timed, Kevin. Thank you. I used to live in L.A. It's fun to find the spots they filmed at. Oh, gosh, that would be so great. Maybe one of these days I should visit Los Angeles and do a Heat tour. Great. Glenn Gerard is here. Greetings, Daisuke. Great to see your enthusiasm. There are so many cool lines in this flick. Yes, I agree. I absolutely agree. Great. Let's see. Just scrolling down again. And Kevin Kelly, you continue. When Venice Boulevard goes under the 10 freeway, it's the location of the armored truck heist, right? Because thank you so much, right? Because they had to do that because all the potential getaway routes, right? Let's see. And I want to say also that in that scene, Let's see. Well, actually, never mind. I'm going to lose my train of thought there, so I'll skip that comment. But anyway, sorry about that. I tend to do that. I always just go off on a topic. I really apologize. Let's see. Great conversations had by all so far. Let's see here. Oh, actually, there's a discussion here about Chris, Shaharlis, and Charlene. I should add one other thing which I forgot to mention in my earlier discussion of the idea of communication and miscommunication in this film. One of the things, though, that we should also point out is that this film is also about modes of communication between people. And sometimes we see that communication fail, as I tried to suggest with those little examples between Michael and Waingro, or between Vincent and that police officer in the truck during the surveillance. But there are also moments when communication is successful, and I do want to. That's another way for me to explain how, for instance, the Vincent character and the Justine character end their relationship. I suggested that they end it in a way that is most connected in terms of their emotional connectivity. That another way to say it is that they are communicating most successfully at this particular moment in time. So it's interesting how it's ironic how they are communicating so clearly at the point that they acknowledge that their relationship is over. Another similar thing happens, and I tried to suggest that it is the opposite for Edie and Neil. But I would say that the Vincent-Justine dynamic, let's describe it that way, is also very much at play in the Chris-Charlene relationship, right? Because they have had a pretty, it's not been a, we understand it's probably not been the sunniest of relationships. It's had its share of ups and downs, it seems. And we understand it had probably its roots in Chris's gambling debts and the like. And so, what is it? It's like, what does he say? It's risk versus reward, baby. And so it's this idea of what is the take? Is the small take really worth getting into all these risks? And this is where they have their argument at the beginning of the film. But then we also understand that he loves her so much, the sun rises and sets with her, man. And so he loves her so much that he is willing to forego the out and really go out on his own and get her. Because that's how much she means to him. But at the point when they meet for the last time, or we assume it's going to be the last time. We don't know what's going to happen after the film's over, but we assume that it's going to be the last time. They have an exchange. It's wordless, but it's that moment, as I said earlier, about her just saying with her hand gesture, this. This is the ultimate form of communication, and it's the moment where their relationship is going to be destroyed forever. Which is, again, such a poignant, ironic way to express communication between people, between men and women, or between humans. And we saw it with Justine and Vincent, but we see it also played out, again, under different circumstances, I understand. But I think the impetus, or the how should I put it, the sort of metaphorical function, I think, is similar, if not the same. Namely, that the two of them are communicating so closely at the point when the relationship is about to be destroyed, which I think is such a powerful moment. And even up to then, I mean, we've seen little glimpses of intimacy and love between them. When the crew had their little dinner early on in the film, they were together, and there was a little look exchange between them. But she still ends up going kind of with the Hank Azaria character, Marciano. And so I know that was sort of under emotional stress, because this was after the shootout, and she's on the phone, and Dominic is crying, and you can tell that she's really visibly emotionally upset. And so maybe she needs company, rather than her going to the Hank Azaria character as a final gesture of wanting to leave the relationship with Chris. I don't think her going to Hank Azaria's character is in any way an indication of that, but it's just she needs someone to be with during this time of real terrible stress for her. But my point is that there were moments where their relationship was sunny, and then there were moments where their relationship was rocky. So it wasn't necessarily all wine and roses. But at this moment, we understand, and we've never necessarily seen them communicate with a great sense of emotional clarity or intimacy. Like we do at that very last moment. So just like with Justine and Vincent, with Charlene and Chris, we see them, the ultimate moment of communication, their ultimate closeness as we see them in the film, is the point where their relationship is destroyed, which I think is such a poignant irony that I just wanted to mention that before I forgot. So anyway, let's see. Oh, Stefan Moon is here. Hello. It's nice to see you. Kevin Kelly, Ralph, yes. Sit down. Yes, sit down. Gosh, yeah, that's a great one. Yes, the television set, right? But again, yeah, poor Ralph. Poor Ralph. Let's see. Twisted Razor. Natalie Portman's performance was surprisingly good. Her outburst in the beginning really did make me a little upset and concerned. Yes, there's a little bit. And the other glimpse that we see of her is around the middle of the film where she's sitting alone, and Vincent just happens to be driving by and has the driver turn and pick her up. She says, I just wanted to be alone, which is now that we understand what happens to her character, I think that is a very what's the phrase, portentous in a subtle way. So yeah, very good point. Let's see, just scrolling down here. David Ruggiero, give me all you got. Yeah, Kevin Kelly says cool cameos from Henry Rollins and Hank Azaria. Also, Bud Cort and a bunch of others actually, and Tom Noonan, and I guess you could also, yeah. Oh gosh, yeah, Xander Berkeley and others. Yeah, it's really great. Let's see here. Yeah, and now there's discussion. I'm at this part of the discussion where there's the Dark Knight discussion, and William Fichtner, who is Van Zandt. He also plays a role, a kind of similar role in the Dark. Well, maybe yes, similar role. They're both in finance. And I think they both handle money here. Van Zandt, you understand, he owns banks. What does Nate say? John Voight character. He owns, what is it? Malibu Equity and Investments, and he owns banks offshore Cayman Islands. And the idea is these are financial institutions that hold drug money offshore. So outside the purview of the U.S. government. And so, let's see. So, what was I saying? So, yes. So, what was I saying? Yeah. So Van Zandt and his character in The Dark Knight, I think, have a similar function. I think, but we'll leave a discussion. I'll leave a discussion of The Dark Knight for another time. I'd love to talk about it one of these days, though. But yeah. So Van Zandt owns banks in the Cayman Islands. I think he's a guy in finance. But let's see. Yeah, Jared says, despite how Hannah and Justine's marriage is very rocky throughout the film, there are moments at the end are really touching. Sort of sad when you know their marriage won't last after that. Yes, exactly. Oh, yes, and Kevin Kelly says, when De Niro meets the girl in the coffee shop, Edie, she says she works at Hennessy and Ingalls, cool bookstore in Santa Monica. Yes, she works there, because she's a graphic designer. She's designed a couple album covers, but and she gets a discount at the store, and there's a whole section of books in her area, right? And what is it? What's her area? Graphic design. And did you go to school for that? Yeah, I went to Parsons. Yeah, oh, thank you. Oh, gosh. Hennessy and Ingalls. Wow. Is that bookstore still there? If so, that'll be really great. Let's see. Jacob Crawford said, I do think Pacino De Niro's characters cause a certain kinetic charge during their on-screen exchange, but I don't know if it's quite deserving of the legendary status it holds. That's a good point. That's very fair. That's very fair. I think that it probably does, but that's I hear that, Jacob. Not a problem, my friend. Not a problem at all. Cooper Glover, 1972. De Niro tries to stay removed from personal relationships, but is getting involved with a woman shows he's only human. Yes, I think so. Heirloom Providence says, one of my favorite aspects of the film is that Macaulay and Hannah are two sides of the same coin. They know each other instinctually, maybe better than most in their life. Yeah, in fact, I love the fact that you used the word coin, because remember in the diner scene, he says, when Vincent says, if it's between you and some poor whose wife you're gonna make into a widow, brother, you're going down. And then remember what De Niro does. He does that little thing, the De Niro thing. He does the thing like this with a little turn of his head, and he looks to the side and he goes back and he does the De Niro preparation. And he says, "There's a flip side to that coin." And so, in fact, it's interesting. Even the characters acknowledge that their relationship is like two sides of the same coin. So I love how you said that, Heirloom Providence. I really do. Let's see. Jacob says, I wonder how much this... Oh, so you're talking about the diner scene and your reaction to it. This has to do with the scene itself, the scene itself's quality, the scene's quality itself. Okay, vis-a-vis the psychosomatic nature of finally seeing the two actors with the legacy they hold opposite each other. Well, there is a certain sense, of course, psychosomatic. That's interesting. There is a kind of mundane sense to their characters talking, which I think adds to the poignancy. This isn't, how shall I put it? How shall I put it? It's like when you have Greek tragedies performed on stage, or Shakespeare plays, Shakespeare tragedies, or Shakespeare histories or tragedies performed on stage. Sometimes you have characters that are on stage together that are so representative of different, let's say, metaphors or forces of nature or something. They're gods or something like that. Or in the case of Shakespeare, maybe they are two colossal characters that are going to meet or something. I'm not sure, but I think a similar kind of dynamic is at play in this coffee diner scene. This is like a staged play almost. And we have two characters that not just characters, but actors that have such a pedigree and such a history. They're sitting together and they are talking in these almost coded language ways, such that their language, not for the entirety of the dialogue, I'll admit, but for a good portion of it, is of course, can be said to be directly relevant to their acting relationship as actors, as professionals in this profession. There is a meta thing going on here. And so I think the fact that their conversations are like mundane, it adds a kind of stage-like feel to it. But even the best moments of the stage, where we have two characters that are undeniably, let's say, representative of something much deeper, they can still talk about things that are rather mundane or rather ordinary, but still that ordinariness actually heightens the drama in a very interesting way. I can't describe it very well. Perhaps maybe I should try to read more Aristotle or something and try to get a better explanation of it. But I guess my point is that the fact that it's so mundane makes it even more dramatic, if that makes any sense. But let's see here. But again, I think your take on it is really also very, very valid, my friend. Not a problem at all. Let's see. Okay. Jared says De Niro's relationship with Edie is ultimately his downfall. That's an interesting thing, although I'm not again, I'm not quite sure if I would go that far, but again, I think it depends on how one interprets Neil's initial reasoning for wanting to leave the life. Did he have these feelings before he met Edie, or did he have these feelings because he met Edie? And I think that's the key. Depending on how one interprets this particular character aspect of Neil, I think one might have different answers to the proposition that you have, Jared. So I think, in other words, if we interpret Neil's situation to be that he didn't think this until he met Edie, and thus that really compelled him to have to go through the Kelso bank heist, then yes, in that regard, his relationship with Edie was his downfall. But if, in fact, he had this inclination prior to meeting Edie, then he would have done this no matter what. So it really wasn't to do with Edie in the first place. But then again, this aspect of his character and his motivations is not clearly spelled out, or it's not clearly delineated in terms of the explicit nature of the narrative and what the filmmakers are showing us. But again, we can interpret this in many different ways, which is what's great about the film. So really great point, Jared. Really great point indeed. Okay. Alan says, love Tom Noonan's brief appearance in this film. Kelso, yes. And he's very still in this. And it's got that great facial hair. And that's it. That's the only time he appears in the final version of the film, right? So let's see. Kevin Kelly says, I used to have the widescreen edition double VHS. Watched it a lot when I was younger. Just like me, my friend. Just like me. I mentioned at this outset of this live stream, I had that same one. It ended at the end of the first tape ended at the end of the diner scene, and it says, "Well, maybe we'll never see each other again." And Vincent slowly smiles, and then Neil slowly smiles, and then the diner, the background noise slowly fades back up, and then cuts to black. And then the second tape starts with Vincent walking back into MCU and says, "They dumped all our surveillance." And what does he say? I had coffee with Macaulay. I had coffee with Macaulay half an hour ago. And I love how he says, there's a weird thing too. He pronounces Michael Cerrito's name Cerrito. And I always thought it was Cerrito, but it's Cerrito, right? Is Michael Cerrito's name, it's spelled Cheritto, right? Is there a way in which you can pronounce his name Cerrito instead of Sherito? I don't know. But I always, in that same scene, the start of VHS number 2, that was where, yes, he says, right, I had coffee with Macaulay half an hour ago. Yeah, that was a great VHS tape. If you still have it, keep it. I suggest keeping it. Yes, okay. Glenn Gerard says, as a group of super crooks, they're not always 100% careful. Diner scene where they rough up Waingro, and a bit at the dinner scene. Yes, yeah, the Waingro scene, again, that's another thing where those are the 2 points where I actually think those are kind of flaws in the film. It's like I mentioned this earlier in the live stream, but I still cannot comprehend exactly how the heck Waingro was able to escape from them the way they did. That was just a completely, I don't think, like, them being at the top of their game the way they are, they would never have been able to let Waingro escape. He couldn't have escaped from there. So that was just something that I think it needed to happen in order to have the plot to progress the way it did. Also, the other scene I think you're referring to, which is the big dinner scene between all the crew, which comes at a very precarious time for them. I suggested earlier in the live stream that they shouldn't have done that. This actually, I think, feels like something that Neil wouldn't do, right? As careful as he is. Of course, they don't know at this time that there's all this heat on them. So maybe that's the reason why. But even so, I would say that was probably not the smartest thing to do, because it was actually that which was the catalyst, if you will. That was how Vincent and his MCU unit were able to spot all these other people and and confirm this stuff, and also that they see Neil for the first time. Who's the loner? That's the first time we're seeing him. Get on it, and that sort of things. That's what the first time they see Neil, and that leads Vincent down his investigation further. So, if without that dinner, I think that probably wouldn't have escalated as fast as it did. Maybe it would have eventually led to Neil, who knows, but it wouldn't have escalated as fast as it did. Also, the fact that it came after Van Zandt attacked them, before they were about to hit one of that place first and then the bank, it seems a little bit, I don't know if Neil would have done it. I think it would have been more in keeping with Neil's character to actually insist not to do that. Why would they get together like that? It seems to be against Neil's philosophy of not having any attachments, not having anything that you can't walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you spot the heat around the corner, that sort of thing. But then again, maybe it can be explained by the fact that in order to have a close-knit crew, you need to have a certain sense of togetherness and brotherhood. And one way to preserve and maintain the sense of brotherhood is perhaps meeting like this. Maybe I can explain it that way. I don't know. But oh well. It does seem a little bit convenient for the plot. Let me put it that way. But that's again, it's one small moment in a very long and involved film. So, but I agree with you, Glenn. Let's see. Alan says, I'd suggest De Niro's downfall is his inability to forego vengeance. Yes, he and his woman, Edie, were nearly gone, but he had to go after Wayne. I agree with that, actually. Although I do think that, just in keeping with Jared's earlier comment, I do think that depending on how one interprets Neil's initial reasoning, or the reasoning why he wanted to go to New Zealand in the first place, was it because of Edie? Was it before Edie? Depending on how one views that, I think one can have different answers to this particular aspect of what happens to Neil at the end there. Really, really great stuff. But yeah. Let's see here. Okay. Cooper Glover, 1972. De Niro and Pacino's characters admire each other. I think if I'm interpreting it correctly. Yes, I agree. Yes. Bill R. says, man said Neil falling in love with Edie is what caused him to be reckless and violate his rules, going back for Waingro. Again, maybe man says this, but I do think also that the film, I will go back to my earlier statements, I think the film does leave room depending on how one interprets it. And I think it'd be interpreted in different ways to say that even, I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong. I don't want to use that word, but I don't think Edie, the fact that he has a relationship with Edie doesn't lead to his downfall necessarily. I think one can interpret that it doesn't lead to his downfall necessarily, which is what I was trying to say earlier. But the fact that also this kind of contradiction seems to have been existing in Neil's character from the very get-go. And there isn't any other indication that says that Edie's existence seems to have Neil let his guard down, or he doesn't, wear down essentially. But there could be something of a sense that maybe because of his need, his inescapable need to have to leave Edie behind at that very final moment, maybe that leads to Neil's sense of maybe not necessarily, or his sense of loss to the point where he doesn't, he has nothing to lose in terms of this final shootout. But then again, that also doesn't quite make sense to me either, because Neil seems to be very much intent on surviving. Otherwise, why would he be running in the shadows as urgently and as in panic-stricken mode as he does? So, in other words, I really still think that it is still left up to interpretation in a very healthy way, and depending on how you view it, I think is I think really what counts. Again, the filmmaker might have an interpretation, which I think is, of course, very valid, perhaps the most valid interpretation in terms of viewing any film, I think. But even so, I still think there is room for different interpretations. Again, but Bill R., your comment, 100% respect for me, my friend. 100%, 1,000%. Let's see. Okay. I'm just scrolling down here just for time, because it's almost 2. So I've been talking for almost 3 hours here, but I don't want to skip any comments. Let's see. I am skipping a lot of comments, actually. I'm saying I don't want to skip comments at the same time that I am skipping comments, but I'm just scrolling down. I'm trying to make sure if I didn't address you by name, I apologize. Let's see. Rui Ferrer is here. I know you commented before, but it's nice to see you again. Casual Glutton, you say, I also saw this on VHS the first time, 4.43 aspect ratio. We are lucky as film fans to have such an abundance of film available on Blu-ray. I don't take that for granted. Yes, that's a good point. Although I should point to my original comments at the outset of this live stream, which is that if you have the director's definitive edition, just be wary of the certain editing issues that have taken place. So if you want a version that, let's say, is closer to the theatrical version of the film, then it's also perhaps a good idea to try to get a copy of an earlier release of the film as well. Let's see. Kevin Kelly says, what were the Blu-ray tweaks? I think you're referring to the director's definitive edition. I mean, I mentioned this earlier in the live stream, but there are some edits made to some of the dialogue. It's very, very imperceptible, but there are some lines that were cut out of the film. Yeah. Yeah, Pete 1972 says that, yeah, ferocious aren't I? That line was dropped. Also, Justine's line of, you sift through the detritus. And also, of course, other differences in terms of the visual palette and the look of the film. And some of the dark scenes, the scenes in darkness and shadow, I think were lifted up a bit in terms of the lightness factor. I don't quite know how to explain it, but if you look at them side by side, you can tell that there's a certain, let's say, a depth of shadow that seems to be turned up a little bit. The lightness is turned up a little bit for the Blu-ray. At least that's how my eye catches it. Okay, let's see. Kevin Kelly says, I like the people at the bus stop when he kicks the TV out. Yes, I do too. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm just gonna scroll down here. Zay Moderno's here. Hello. It's nice to see you, my friend. Bill R says, I watched it in theaters when I was 11. I teared up at the end. Oh gosh, so you watched this in the theater too, my friend. Oh, that's great. So you were 11 in the theater. So might I assume this was 1995? Okay, so I'm probably therefore maybe a few years older, but I still count that as being, if you don't mind being in the same generation as I. Maybe you do. So I'll call you the younger generation. Yes, there was such an emotional wallop at the end, wasn't there? And I just remember that, and the way that the music and everything hangs together, and they're so still. All this movement and motion and the running back and forth, and not only that, the volatility and the action and the dialogue and the Pacino outbursts and all this ends in this quiet moment, this beautiful glistening light in the background and the two of them in the foreground, darkness and shadow. One is standing, one is lying down, deceased. They're both holding hands, and it's still, and then the music slowly comes up and it bursts into this huge glorious energy. Boom, black, a Michael Mann film, and then the credits roll. What an amazing way to end it. And yes, to see it in the theater, I still remember that moment. Wow, what, I would feel so honored to have been able to see this in the theater. If ever, my friends, you get a chance to see Heat in the theater and you haven't already done so, you must experience this in the theater. There is nothing quite like it. I do remember also that, well, actually, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna go, let's see, okay, all right, I'm just gonna keep going here because I think there's a lot more Marlon is here. Hello. Gray Rainbow's here. Hello. It's nice to see you. So sorry. I'm just scrolling down because I have. It's almost 2, and I have to go soon. I've been talking too long and missing out on your great live chat, but I'm catching up with it right now. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, and I'm at the part of the live chat where I think I was referring to the monstrous nature of this cast of characters, of these criminals, which for a good portion of the film seem almost to be depicted as anti-heroes, or the way in which we might be able to sympathize with them. But yes, they are very monstrous. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so I'm now at the, oh gosh, am I at the end? All right. Frank Burleson is here. Hello. That's nice to see you. Okay, sorry about this. I'm just, oh gosh. See, this is the thing, I really have to apologize. I've been criticized for this, but I think rightly so. I always try to go with the flow in these live streams, but it's always, I do that, but then I lose track of the live chat because I can't talk and watch the live chat scroll at the same time, and so I have to. There's a little bit of delay. I could always turn down the speed of it, I suppose, but I think that loses the spirit of the live chat, and so I leave it on at the regular speed. But that means also I have to do a lot of catch up, which also means that I talk too much and I don't leave enough room for the live chat, which is my fault indeed, my friends. I apologize deeply. But let's see. While I'm here, let's see here. Frank Burleson says, I know nearly every one of the sites used for the filming. So you live in Southern California. Very jealous, my friend. That's really wonderful. Really, really wonderful. I didn't mention it too, but I love the scene. While I have a moment, I love the scene. It kind of goes to the idea of mirroring. Also, actually, that's one other thing. I know it's almost 2, but that's one other thing I want to mention I didn't mention. The other thing that I think is very important about this film is the power of the gaze and the power of the look, and how powerful and almost dangerous the gaze and the look are as they are depicted in this film. And I've mentioned this idea about communication and the relationships between characters. Well, one way in life, in reality, my friends, I'm sure you know this. I know this based on my own experience. One way that I can communicate or have a connection with another human being is by looking at them, or they looking at me, or this person looking at me, the gaze that we exchange. And I think this film is playing with that kind of the operative function of human communication in a very clever way. For example, we see the gaze operated, of course, in terms of the police surveilling the criminals. We see this, of course, in many ways, in a number of different scenarios. Excuse me. We also see this roles reversed, of course, in a very clever scene. And one of my favorite scenes is where the police are drawn out into the middle of this desolate refinery somewhere, and they've been drawn out here because they think this is Neil's and crew's next target. But then we realize they've been drawn out, and this is where that great moment of realization comes in, and Vincent says, is this guy something or is he something? This crew is good. You know what? You want to know what they're looking at? And that wonderful music, that weird, almost rusty kind of like crow cawing sound comes on the soundtrack, and he says, and Vincent says, you want to know what he's looking at? Us, the LAPD. The police department. He doesn't say police, he says police department. The LAPD, the police department. We just got made. And we see the roles reversed, perfect. Up in the distance, we see Neil taking photos, and he says, and then Vincent, yeah, okay. And then he does that lovely little turn, that little ha, which is used in all the trailers, And then he says, "Okay, mother," so, and he just walks away, and Vincent, and then Neil gives that little smile as he walks. So he walks away. He doesn't take the camera with him, which is an interesting. I'm sure he takes the camera after the film cuts, but what was I saying? But yeah, so that's an interesting idea of the gaze and looking at each other, and how the act of looking is itself a kind of weapon. It's certainly the act of surveillance in Vincent, and what his job is, I think, is paramount to his success. It's, after all, the gaze that makes him notice Neil after they leave from the dinner that time. It's also the gaze that makes him focused on his prey. That's how Justine describes him. And that sort of, and I think also this is played again. It's another example of mirroring, because for Vincent the gaze is also very important, very piercing, and also very deadly and dangerous. Not only do we see him looking down at this scene that I gave an example of, where he is turning the tables on Vincent, but excuse me, there we go. But also the gaze comes in quite coldly in that climactic scene between Neil and Waingro, when Neil breaks into the hotel room. And what does he say? He says, after he has subdued him, he's on the couch, and Neil's standing there with his gun, arms extended, about to exact vengeance on this terrible man who has done these terrible things in this terrible world. And what does he say? He says, "Look at me, look at me," and he says, "Look at me." So it's the gaze that is most important at the moment that he wants to exact vengeance. So there's almost something of a kind of cruelty that De Niro, or Neil, is employing by insisting upon the gaze. And so there's this idea of looking, of course, surveillance, but it's the idea also that the gaze is one way to communicate, but it's also a dangerous thing. It can be a cruel thing, and it can be something that is very much in keeping with a character, and the idea also of looking is, I think, expressed, of course, in the way that people use firearms and use guns. I mean, after all, the gun or the firearm is used in this film, or in any film, is in fact a kind of extension of one's looking at someone else, right? It's just a matter of, and in fact, that kind of gaze is also weaponized, right? Because we have an actual weapon being the tool that will be used to harm or hurt or kill the subject of one's gaze at that particular moment. And so that is all extended, I think, throughout this film. But I just wanted to mention that before I forgot, because I really should have integrated it better into the live stream chat. But oh well, c'est la vie. Okay, so with that, it is 2 a.m. So by my count, I have been on this for about 3 hours. So again, I have to scroll down here, and I'm skipping over a lot of great comments, and I'm just heartbroken. I really am, because I can't focus in on them as much as I would like to. But okay, so I think I find myself at the end, and Chandan Rawal is here. Hello, my friend. Let's see. Okay, so I think I'm all caught up. Yes. Bill R says, I see it as a righteous vengeance more than cruelty. You're talking about De Niro's or Neil's act against Waingro. I actually see it as both, actually. It is very, very cruel. I mean, there's nothing that says that vengeance and cruelty are mutually exclusive. I mean, they can be, but I don't think they have to be all the time. And so there is something, the way in which Waingro gives out that terrible sounding like scream when he's shot in the chest, and then that terrible second shot. Of course, we don't see it, but we see the aftermath. That suggests to me a kind of level of cruelty on the part of Neil, as well as him exacting his vengeance. But then again, it is the nature of Waingro as a character. I mean, he is, as I say, the villain of the piece. I think so anyway. And so to see the villain of the piece oft in this way, and we've seen the villain do some pretty terrible things, not just against Neil and his crew, whom we have come to a certain extent anyway, sympathize with, but also we've seen Waingro lash out against other innocents in this film, as well as the implication that he's done a lot of terrible things in the past that we just haven't been privy to by virtue of watching the film. But yeah, but again, that's another great thing about the film, right? We can all interpret it in a different way, but still come to a similar conclusion about the film's greatness. So thank you very much, Bill R. Very much indeed. I appreciate your comments, as well as the comments from all our friends here today. So I am now at the end of the live chat. Again, I didn't address all of the questions there as I would have liked to, so I apologize. But I hope you can understand, and I hope you enjoyed talking with each other and amongst each other during this particular stream. I really appreciate it. And so, okay, so, and then Jared says something very interesting here at the end here. Vincent is the protagonist, Neil is the antagonist, but Waingro is the villain. Well, that's an interesting way of putting it. Or hero, anti-hero, and villain, right? Because we can say that a villain and the anti-hero aren't always the same, one and the same. But yes, so with that, my friends, let me now conclude or just wrap up by saying that this is yet another live stream that is now in the books. So thank you very much for all of your time and for tuning in and for your comments and contributions. You have given me much food for thought and a lot of great things to think about with respect to this film. That's another great thing about this film too. I mean, it's a great thing about many films, of course, but this film in particular, because a lot is left unsaid, and therefore there is much room for interpretation. And I think that's one of the great things about this film. That's also an interesting thing about Mann's work in general, Michael Mann's work in general. And so I will. I had a real blast with this, and I just want to thank you very much for your comments and your commentary. As always, it's really been very helpful to me because this film, as I say, is one that I know in terms of seeing very much, and I feel like I've had a long relationship with this film, but there are so many things I have yet to understand. One of which being, of course, I don't understand, I don't know the city of Los Angeles as well as I do, and I think part of the fun of this film is knowing that it is a Los Angeles film. So one of these days I really should do a Los Angeles tour, a Heat Los Angeles tour, and to get a better appreciation of this film and the locations. But you know, that is just one of many great things about this film, and that is kind of what do you call it? That is kind of my my take on it. So thank you very much once again. And I hope that you are well during these times. Once again, it is a very strange, weird, dangerous, stressful set of circumstances that I think we all find ourselves in, the entire world find ourselves in. And so, you know, just remember to stay strong, stay well, stay healthy, and, you know, right, and let's, you know, with this kind of this terrible issue that the world is facing, you know, we can win, and we can hold out, and we won't give in, of course. In fact, I'd like to think, you know, I've mentioned this in other videos with respect to other lines of dialogue, but other films. But if I could borrow a line of dialogue from this film Heat, I'd like to think that if we were all to stare down our common foe in this world crisis right now, of course, I would borrow a line from Vincent Hanna, Al Pacino, and say, look at this common foe of ours straight in the eye and say, brother, you are going down, right? And so that's how I feel about this current world situation. Stay strong, because in the end, this common foe is going down. So, my friends, that's my roundabout way of saying just continue to take good care of yourselves, and continue to be strong, stay safe, stay healthy, and take very good care of yourselves and your loved ones during these times. Really, that is the most important thing. And once you've taken care of that, of course, please continue to watch a lot of great movies. So with that, that is a wrap where I am. And next Saturday, I think, what's the schedule? Yes, so next Saturday is we will start the Before trilogy, and then not the entire trilogy, but the first film in the trilogy. So Before Sunrise. And so if you're interested, please, you can join us same time, same place. So next Saturday, same time, 11 p.m. Tokyo time, we'll be discussing the first film in the Before trilogy. I will make an announcement later on this channel, so stay tuned for further updates. And then the following Saturday, so 2 weeks from today, we will be talking about a James Bond film. And what film will we be talking about, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked that, my friends, because you can help me decide. There is a video on my YouTube channel right now. It's still open. It's still active. You can still watch it, wherein I ask you, the viewers and friends, to leave behind a comment. It's not going to be decided by vote or a poll. I've done that in the past, and I think it's worked very well. But this time I want to do something a little bit different. I want to be convinced by your powers of persuasion, and the comment or comments that are the most convincing, the most persuasive, will be those comments that will choose the film that we will discuss. And so if you want to try to convince me of the reason why we should discuss this particular film or that particular film, you can. Even a film that has only one mention, if the comment is convincing enough and really well written and has good arguments, then I will choose that film. Now, please rest assured that I will remain objective. In other words, I won't have any preconceived plan. In other words, I won't be thinking I want to have this film and I'll just use this comment as an excuse to talk about the film that I want. No, I promise you, my friends, my decision will be as objective as possible. I will make sure of that. And so I will try to explain my reasoning when the film is chosen, etc. But my point is that if this is not necessarily dependent on how many people vote for it, but rather how convincing you are with respect to your reasons why you want to talk about it. And so even a voice of one can be the most convincing voice. And so that's what I wanted to say. It's a little bit different, but there is still a little bit of time. So if you want to try to contribute that or leave a comment behind convincing me of that particular film that you want to talk about, by all means, please do so. And we will go from there. I think, what did I say? I think it's going to be the middle of next week, I think. May 7th or May 8th, May 7th, I think. I forget exactly. I tend to forget these things unless I look at them on the screen. So I'm afraid I don't have it in front of me, but I think that's what it is. You can check the video out for yourselves directly for more detailed information. But that will be 2 weeks from now. So a James Bond film. And then 3 weeks from now, it'll be the second film in the Before trilogy, and then 4 weeks from, is it 4 weeks from now? Is it really that far away? Then we will be talking about another non-trilogy film. I don't know what it will be yet, but I will let you know as soon as I know. It might be a poll, it might be my own choice. I haven't decided yet, but I have a few ideas already as to what it could be. But I will try to make it as, I will try to be as varied as possible. You know, considering that we're talking about Heat, and then we're talking about the Before trilogy, and then we're talking about James Bond film. I'll try to make that other free Saturday one that might be something a little bit different than the ones that we've already talked about. I'll do my best anyway. So please rest assured. So if you haven't been having fun with any of these live stream schedules in May, then I'll hopefully make a decision for that free Saturday that will be more up your alley. But I will certainly do my best. So there's that. And what else should I say? what else should I say? I think that's it for me. And also, let's see. Um, I should say also that it does need to be a film that I'm prepared to talk about for like 2 or 3 hours. And so, not to say I dislike these film club live streams. I do. I really love them, but I do admit that they do take a lot out of me. Um, uh, to borrow a line from Vincent Hanna, when I think of these film chat live streams, something comes out of me. And so, I think I do want to. It can't. I'm sorry to say it can't be kind of a random film, but it has to be a film that I'm willing to be able to invest the energy in for like 3 hours straight. It does. I'm not getting any younger, unfortunately, and so I am feeling a little bit of exhaustion at the end. And so, I get a lot of great suggestions, which is really wonderful. But at the same time, I always have to consider something that I will be able to sustain for a continued amount of time, live, of course, too. And I have to be careful of that. I'm always very nervous with live streams, to be perfectly honest, because I'm always nervous about making a mistake or anything like that. I always could correct myself, but I don't mean mistakes in terms of what I say necessarily, although I'm afraid of those too. But I just also, you never know what's going to happen live. And so if something were to happen in terms of a mishap, then I could always edit it out. But with live streams, you can't really do that. And so there's this extra added sense of preparation that I need to make, which is, again, all on me, and it's kind of incumbent on me to do that. But maybe that's a way, maybe that's my own misgiving, or not misgiving, but that's my own weakness, and it's something I have to remedy better. I know a lot of people who are on YouTube who really do excellent live streams all the time, flawless, absolutely flawless. I don't know how they do it. I wish I had an ounce of their energy, but yes, but again, it does take a little bit of thought for me to be able to just actually consider. It's not just a film that I like, but it's something that I feel like I can talk about for whatever it is, 3 hours. So, I can't necessarily do that for every single film that I've seen, but I'd love to be able to have that opportunity or that talent, but unfortunately, I'm not that talented. So, but I will do my best. So I will really consider everything. So I will try to maintain as open a mind as possible with respect to that final Saturday, that free Saturday. So there's that. Also, it's not a live stream, but now that I'm about to go to sleep, I just want to say that I have finished, at long last, I finished the John Carpenter journey, more or less. I do have a few final comments to make, and I will make a ranking video. I always do this at the end. I always rank the films in terms of my own personal preference. And so I will be doing that. Maybe I'll try to, I haven't shot it yet. I have the list, and I have my general comments planned in my head, so I can shoot it at any time. I guess I could do it tomorrow. Tomorrow's Sunday where I am. So, and in fact, actually this week, it's what's called Golden Week here in Japan. So it's actually a series of holidays that span about a week's worth of holidays. So I'm on my break, and if it weren't for this darned world crisis, then I think my family would be on a kind of a family trip somewhere. But in fact, we're staying home during the entirety of the vacation time. And so that's my way of saying that I think tomorrow I might have the opportunity to actually shoot the final John Carpenter video. And so I'll try to upload that as soon as possible. It might be a long one, actually, because there are what is it, 22 or 23 entries that I have to mention in terms of the ranking. Is that right? Something like that. And so I'll have to, it takes a little bit, the rankings take a little bit more time in terms of my editing than the other videos do, because I have to, I don't want to get into it too much, but it's a great pleasure, but it also takes a little bit of time. But I'll be doing that as soon as possible. Hopefully tomorrow, but I can't make any promises. But I'll see what I can do. I have the list though. I know exactly what my ranking is. But actually, I want to do that. That's one of the reasons why I want to do it as soon as possible, shoot the video as soon as possible, because I have fear that if I wait a week or maybe in a few days, the ranks will change, because I tend to shift a lot in terms of my ranking choices all the time. Even my top choices, my top five or my top three even are just shifting around almost constantly. But I think I have a really good top three now, and so I want to keep it as it is. I really am excited about it. But I'm talking too much now. So in any event, my friends, thank you very much, and be well, and take very good care of yourselves. Stay safe, and just continue to stay strong during these times. I will see you again very soon, and cheers. Okay. All right, so that's it. Great, thank you very much. And I'm just shutting down here. I know the camera's still on, so don't worry. But thank you again for your time and for sticking around as long as you did. I really appreciate it. Again, I can't go as long as a lot of other people, but that was pretty good. I enjoyed that. This is a really great film. Let's see. And gosh. Let's see here. Right now, okay. So, thank you very much. And film. What are we going to do for that free Saturday for the live stream? I have to think about that. Maybe I'll think about that as I go to sleep today. I'll have to think of something that's different. That's one of the challenges, trying to think of something that has enough variety to give people the opportunity to participate if they want. So I'll try to think of something. Have we done a musical? Have we done a musical yet? I'm not sure. I guess we kind of did. We did the Red Shoes. That's kind of a musical, I guess. Well, no, not really. Maybe we should do a musical. I'm not sure. Don't hold me to that yet. But if we haven't done a musical, we haven't done a musical yet. We haven't done a silent film. That's another thing too. I always want to do a silent film, but we haven't done one yet. Much to my chagrin and great embarrassment. We've done a number of Japanese films, so I maybe I feel comfortable talking about Japanese films, but at the same time, I don't want to overplay my Japanese cinema hand, if you know what I mean. We've talked about a number of Hitchcock films already, so I don't want to go there again, although I really want to, because there's so many great Hitchcock films to talk about. But again, for the sake of variety, I do want to think of things that we haven't necessarily talked about yet. But that's what I'm thinking about right now, and I'll try to give that some real serious thought as I go to sleep today, and then as I wake up tomorrow. So, all right, my friends, sorry to keep talking like this. I will be quiet now, and take care. Have a really great day, my friends, wherever you are in the world. Talk to you again very soon. Cheers. Bye-bye. Ballad of Narayama.